All right, everybody, we're just gonna wait while everybody topples here into the room. Great. Last time we said we were going to do a song and dance with the introduction. We forgot to do that this time. All right, awesome. All right, guys. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our special, more people are toppling in, but I'm just going to get us started. Guys, I wanted to say welcome to our very, very special presentation today with Stage 32 and Netflix. This is kicking off our TV content creation program, and we are super excited today to be going over television pilot story structure for dramas. So super excited about that. We're going to have a couple introductions here, and before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Amanda. I'm the managing director here at Stage 32, and I wanted to welcome you today. And for those of you who are not familiar with Stage 32, Stage 32 is the entertainment industry's largest global marketplace for discovering new talent and material. For 10 years, we've been the largest online platform that has been democratizing the global entertainment industry. We have been connecting and training nearly 1 million creatives and professionals worldwide, and we have the largest library of entertainment industry education in the world with over 2,000 hours of education. Plus, we work with thousands of industry professionals, including development executives, managers, agents, producers, financiers, and everything in between. So if you are interested in getting your material to the point where it needs to be ready for the global marketplace, you have no better option than Stage 32. So if you have not created a Stage 32 profile, just go to stage32.com and join. It's free, and you'll join nearly 1 million people worldwide that are in the platform. And second thing today, before we get started, we're a social network. So let's get social. In the chat box, I stuck in several Twitter and Instagram accounts. So if you guys can take out your phones right now, and on Twitter, if you can follow at Stage 32, and if you could follow at Netflix, and then if you could follow at RB Walks Into a Bar, who is our Stage 32 CEO, that I'm about to hand it on over to you. And same thing on Twitter. So anything you learned today, please share this worldwide. Obviously, this community is a community of support and encouragement. So please share what you learn worldwide. So I'm going to turn it over to our Stage 32 CEO, Richard Botto. He is a writer, producer, actor, and obviously our fearless leader at Stage 32. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, RB.
Thank you, Amanda. Welcome, everybody. I know we have people from all over the world today. I believe people have signed up from every country in the world, from what I understand and what I've been told by my crack staff, so we couldn't be more proud of that. This is a program that's been about a year in the making. Chris Mack, who's on your screen, has been instrumental and unbelievable to work with, and I consider him a friend at this point. And the commitment by Netflix to finding new voices, finding original material, and their commitment not only from a monetary standpoint, but from a creative standpoint to create new content all over the globe, especially local language content right now. And the expansion into local language content has been extraordinary. And to be able to partner with them it fits right in line with our mission, which Amanda, mentioned earlier. For the last 10 years, our mission has been to democratize the entertainment industry by leveling the playing field for all creatives and professionals worldwide. And, over the last 10 years, 900,000 members on the platform, tens of thousands of success stories. I mean, they come in every hour. We've had 3 in the last hour that have been really fascinating for people internationally who have found success through the platform. We couldn't be more proud of that. And we couldn't be more proud of this initiative, which is creating content for the global marketplace. This is a 5-webinar program that's going to be running for the next calendar year. The first one today is being taught by, of course, Anna Henry, who you see on your screen, who is not only one of my favorite people on the planet, but certainly one of the most knowledgeable people you will ever meet when it comes to this industry, and especially when it comes to producing, writing, and developing television. So we're really excited about that as well. We've had over 25,000 people sign up for this webcast, and we expect that number to continue to climb on demand. So amazing the amount of people that are interested in this kind of thing. But even more impressive was Chris Mack's workshop, which was the first part of this partnership, which we had to date, we've had 115,000 people view, which makes it the most viewed in the entertainment industry webinar in the history of the internet. So we couldn't be more proud of that. So on that note, since I pumped up his ego just a little bit, I am going to pass this over to Chris Mack from Netflix. And Chris, again, thank you so much for helping us and putting this all together with us. Oh, Chris, you're muted, buddy.
Oh, Chris, you're muted.
Yeah, of course. It's a daily thing. Thanks for that. It's funny, I was in Egypt a couple of weeks ago and Saudi Arabia last week, just doing some things over there, just trying to figure out what the creative talent pool was like. And in Egypt, I was at this panel and this young lady came up to me and said, can I take a picture with you? And at first she thought maybe I was like, I don't know, some famous basketball star or something. And I just said, why? I've never done anything. And she goes, oh no, I love your work. I've seen you on Stage 32. And I was giving a panel there. She said, I wanted to get into your panel, but it was sold out. And so I was just like, thank you, Stage 32. Now I can't go anywhere in the world without getting pictures now. So anyway, I did take a picture with her and I gave her some tips and I moved on. So about tonight. So at the risk of sounding dramatic, never before in the history of mankind has there been so much content being made. And we believe that there are not enough storytellers and people to produce all the shows that all these big media companies, including ourselves, want to make. So we desperately need you guys to become great at writing television series and movies. So the reason why I partner with Stage 32 is because they're a huge forum of individuals wanting to learn how to write. And I remember when we first met, Amanda said, we can get you 10,000 people to watch. And I didn't believe her. And I said, all right, so for every person under $10,000, you're going to give me $10 back, right? And so, of course, 115,000 people later, Stage 32 is the real deal. So tonight you're going to learn about the pilot, which is probably the most important, script of your series that you're going to write, because it's the first impression, right? It's that first date. And if you don't make a first impression, and if you don't come with your best foot forward, people are going to go see something else. They're either going to go to another, series that they've been thinking about, or their Instagram, or hopefully go play outside, right? Let's keep everything in perspective, and let's remember that there's still books to read and there's still stuff to do outside as well. So I hope you learn a lot from this in terms of how to grab your audience as quickly as possible. There's going to be 4 more workshops to this series, which will take you through different genres and even how to write a producible script. But while you're learning the craft of writing, I also want you guys to take the time to learn who you are as an artist, right? So remember, you're basically taking something, you're taking a blank slate, right? And you have to put words on a page to make people feel something, right? You're creating a document that's going to invite other very creative people to bring it to life. Okay, so I know there's a lot of individuals around the world. I've been doing this for 2 years, and I've met truly talented people who have stories to tell, who the way their system is set up is you either write, you know, when you get a job, or you write when you get funded by your, you know, local government or film fund. And I would encourage you not to write to get a job, but to write to get better. I'm going to use Hollywood as an example, and I'm not saying Hollywood is the best, you know, way of writing and doing business, but, you know, this idea of writing to potentially sell something as a spec script, or, you know, writing a pilot and maybe getting staffed, what it does that nobody talks about is it's forcing everyone to just write scripts on their own with, you know, with hopefully getting sold or whatever, but usually they don't, and they get practice, you know. So I was running the Warner Brothers workshop for 10 years, and the people that got into the workshop, you know, it was like we did like 2,500 submissions. We would invite 8 people, and the people that got into the workshop usually had 7 or 8 scripts that nobody would ever read. And that's the practice, that's the reps. So I encourage you guys just to write. If somebody asks you what you do or what you want to be, say you're a writer. Don't be ashamed of it, because the more you believe it, the better your stories will be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda, and I hope you get a lot out of this. And go create, everyone.
I love it. Thank you so much, RB. Thank you so much, Chris. We're super excited about this partnership. And before I turn on over to the star of the show today, I wanted to just go over a couple housekeeping things before we get started. I want you guys to understand what's in store for today. We have about 3 hours that we're going to be going over, somewhere between about 2 to 3 hours. So we're going to schedule a break in the middle. So just know that you'll have an option for a bathroom break, or if you need to go grab a snack. And then a lot of questions will come in, a lot of the questions that are coming in is, can I watch this on demand? And the answer is yes. So you will just need to create a Stage 32 profile. You will need to have a Stage 32 account in order to watch the video. And you'll be able to access this by clicking your settings and then clicking your purchase history in the top right-hand corner. And one very, very cool thing that Anna has done is she's actually created story maps for Lupin, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Expanse, and Succession. And so all of those we're going to be giving to you guys with the on-demand recording. So once you log in and watch the on-demand recording, then you'll be able to download those as PDFs underneath the recording. So just make sure you sign in for the on-demand so you have access to see all those story maps, because they're really, really awesome. And then the other thing too is that we make sure you stick around till the end, because we're actually going to give something away to everybody that's here in the room. So hopefully you can make it for the whole time, because we've got something really cool that we're going to be handing out to you guys. And the other thing too is that we have created a private chat lounge in the Stage 32 lounge. So what I did is I put in the chat box the lounge that I've created. So for those of you who are Stage 32 members, go ahead and click that link, and that'll take you right to our specific chat section for today. And when you click on that, I would love for everybody to type in where they're tuning in from. Netflix obviously is such a global, such a global company that it's always really cool for us to see where you're tuning in from. So go ahead and click on that link, and then type in where you're tuning in from. I think that's it in terms of housekeeping, and I think that that's it. And now I think it's time to turn things over to the star of our show, Anna Martin Henry. And so I have worked with Anna now for like 5 or 6 years, and she has a long-standing history in television. She's worked either for or with companies like CBS, NBC, Netflix, Stars. She's had clients that have had projects on all of these networks. She is very, very, very versed in streaming and network television, and I am really excited
excited to have her teach our first kicking off webinar for this Netflix series. So Anna, I'm going to turn it on over to you. Chris, RB, thank you so much for being here today, and look forward to today.
Thank you, Chris and RB and Amanda. All right.
Absolutely. All right, there you go, Anna. And I'll be here the whole time, and then I'll be here when it's time for our break as well. But I'll leave it on you to take it away.
All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am, as you know, going to talk about creating pilots for a 1 hour series. It would be much the same for a half hour actually. There's going to be a ton of content here. I'm going to go through a lot, and I think probably quite quickly. So I really encourage you to sign up to get the download of this webinar and to get those story maps that I've created for the examples that we're using today. That way you can go through those story maps and see exactly how the structure that I'm going to go over is playing out in 4 very different 1 hour pilots, first episodes. They are picked strategically so that they are quite different from each other, so that you can see the same structure playing out in quite different shows, and that it's really the same throughout. And then come back and watch this again and be able to pause and digest a lot of the content. So don't worry if it feels like, wow, this is a lot going really fast, because you can always come back to it and look back at the content again. So with that, I want to get started and share my screen, because we have a wonderful PowerPoint here that I'm going to try to put into presenter mode.
It looks like it's pulling up the
Yeah.
slides left.
Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, let's.
There we go. I think that that's going to be, yes, that's going to be correct now. Yay, sorry about that. That's
Perfect.
what happens when you have 2 monitors and your computer is trying to figure that out. So we are going to use these 4, like I said, these 4 examples that are 4 shows that have been hits for a reason, and that I also love. Lupin on Netflix, obviously, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon, The Expanse, which was originally created for Sci-Fi Channel, and so that's a basic cable show, but now you can view it on Amazon. It's moved over, and then Succession on HBO, obviously. So those are our 4, and you will see that they are quite different, you know, including like The Expanse being a very sci-fi, you know, what we call world building show, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is really a 1 hour comedy, Succession, which is an ensemble show, versus Lupin, which is much more of a single star show, obviously. So, and really from various different creators. So a lot of writers go about writing shows by writing a pilot, first of all, and then thinking about, oh wait, where's the show going? What is the series, after they've already finished writing the pilot. But in reality, to me, I always think about it that that's like asking Google Maps which way to turn out of your garage, but without specifying where you're headed. It can't give you directions without an endpoint that you're going to, right? So in reality, you really want to create your show first and then write your pilot. If you've already written your pilot and haven't given any thought to what your show is going to be about in general, don't worry, you can go back, give some thought to that, create the elements of a show, and then circle back to your pilot, and you're going to see that you want to rewrite a number of things just by thinking about, where am I going with this? Because a pilot is really part 1 of a much bigger whole, right? Unlike a feature that closes at the end, a pilot opens at the end to an entire series. It's only the start of a journey rather than the end of it. Let's talk about, we were just talking about some of the types of 1 hour pilots, that the 4 that we've picked, but let's talk about kind of the types of shows that we see. We see definitely dramas, obviously, but we also see comedies that are 1 hour, like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And then we see 2 genres that are kind of very similar to each other, and there are varying definitions of these. The one that I like, that I think makes maybe the most sense, is that we have kind of comedic dramas that are really dark, that have mostly drama with a big element of comedy, that are dark comedies. And then we have dramedies that are really light dramas, where the comedic element is, you know, really more highlighted, even though there's drama in there. But they're very similar. And here are a bunch of different genres that I'm sure you've seen, everything from serialized crime shows, and we'll talk about what serialized means in a second, but you've seen, I'm sure, political shows, horror shows, ensemble shows that are about family or friends or coworkers, what we call procedurals, which are episodic shows like detective shows and medical shows, period, which refers to historical shows, YA, which is young adult shows. So I'm sure you've seen all of these genres. We actually use the word genre in 2 different contexts, which I realize gets very confusing. This is, you know, I didn't invent this, but one is the type of show, like what we're talking about right now, but we also use the word genre, a genre show, to indicate sci-fi or supernatural, fantasy or comic book, essentially shows with an alternate reality, right? The other way that you can categorize shows is episodic versus serialized. And this also gets a little bit murky, but to try to clarify this, episodic is maybe easier to define first. These are shows where the episodes are closed-ended. They all still have some kind of series arc, but it comes kind of sprinkled in the evolution of the characters. And in your pilot, you will see that it kind of like, that starts at the very end of the pilot. Now, at one point in the past, like when we, 20 years ago, when we had like the original Law and Order, for example, which is an episodic show, they didn't really have a serialized and ongoing component. Each episode stood completely unto itself. Now, all episodic shows have some serialized element as the characters evolve. But the way to kind of tell an episodic show from a serialized one is that the hallmark is that there's a team of series regulars who come back episode after episode, but there's a guest cast for each episode. So each episode also has its own completely separate cast that is only for that episode. So it's a case of the week kind of show. Most of the shows that you've probably seen, and all of the ones that are examples, are serialized shows where all the storylines continue episode to episode. But of course, each episode has like a mini story of itself, and including the pilot. So there is a part of the story that resolves momentarily at the end of the pilot, and every episode is going to be like that. It's not that they don't have a story, but the storylines continue. Hopefully that makes sense of the 2 different kinds. And then here's another way to categorize these pilots, to put them into different categories: ongoing series, limited series, mini series, and anthology series. Ongoing series are what you are most familiar with, perhaps. Succession is certainly one like this. There are multiple seasons. The story doesn't end at the end of the season. It just keeps going and going. Limited series are one story in one season that concludes at the end of the season. So it's usually 6 to 10 episodes. This has become very, very fluid. And they all have now sort of a requirement that future seasons should be possible, in theory anyway. So Stranger Things, by the way, started out like this, right? The first season kind of has a conclusion and then sort of restarts the show in the second season. And I'm sure you've seen lots of limited series by now. Miniseries are one story in a very short number of installments, almost like a very extended feature, although the structure is still the same. And when you look at the first episode of a mini series, you will see the same kind of pilot structure as what we're going to go over. But it's 2 to 6 installments or so, and the story is closed with no future seasons possible. So Chernobyl is like a really great example. There is no, or Queen's Gambit, there is no second season. It's not possible. Anthology shows completely reboot, either in each episode or in each season, where it's an entirely new cast, an entirely new world, and the episodes or seasons, however the anthology is done, are loosely connected thematically or structurally. So I'm sure you've seen these as well. Modern Love is one. American Horror Story is another one. There's lots of them now that operate this way, that are anthology shows. I'm sure you can think of other ones as well. So the first thing we're going to do is go through those elements to think about your show, to develop your pilot before you actually start writing. And I'm going to go through each of these elements. So this is just kind of a table of contents, and we're going to go through each and every one of these. Maybe the most important is your story engine, and then your stakes, your structure for the show, your world, your characters, your themes, and your tone. Those of you who have watched Chris's pitch workshop, this should look eerily familiar, where you should be thinking, oh, wow, this is exactly what's needed for my pitch. Yes, it is. So let's talk about story engine first. And every show needs a story engine to keep it going. It's an inherent and unresolvable conflict that propels the show. It's an engine. Engines make things go, and that's exactly what a story engine is. That's why it's named that. So this will make your show progress episode to episode and potentially season to season. It's all about why the characters are together. It's an inherent conflict because it comes out of who the characters are. And it's unresolvable in that there is no easy end. It couldn't resolve after an episode or two because it comes out of the conflicts that are part of who the characters are. There are character versus character. A conflict is always a versus, right? One thing versus another thing. So two of the most common ones, or really the two kinds of story engines that you will see, are character versus character story engine, where it's all about interpersonal dynamics and either a shared or conflicting goal. So Succession has exactly this type of story engine, right? It's inherent because it's coming out of who those characters are. Unless they have a personality transplant, the conflict can't resolve. The other kind is character versus world, where a character is kind of out of step with the world that they are living in. And this is like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She is really out of sync, out of time with her world, because of who she is and what her goals are, and because of the rules of the world that she's living in. Unless she gets teleported to a different time or changes who she is, there is no resolution to her conflict. And this relates really to the stakes, which is what's at risk for our characters. And there are two kinds of stakes. One is the external stakes, like what they want to achieve, the actual goal that they are after. Like control of a family empire, for example, or retrieving a necklace. That's the external goal. But then they also have an emotional connection to the goal, what it means to them to attain that, what that would give to them emotionally. And that's really their motivation. So what's at stake for them? What do they stand to gain or lose, both internally, emotionally, and then also in a tangible reality? And think about the structure of your show. Like, what's your way into the story, or how is the story going to be told? Who is at the center of your story? Some pilots, some shows flow out of a triggering event. So an event happens at the very beginning, and that's really where the first movement of the show comes from, and everything else becomes a consequence of that. Some just explore a specific setting, like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, that explores the world of stand-up comedy. While there's a triggering event there too, really the show hinges on exploring that setting as it goes forward. Some center on one character or a group of characters, and it's really exploring their dynamics, like Succession, for example. Some follow the evolution of specific relationships, and actually that's, and I guess another kind of structural way of putting, for example, Succession. So some you're really exploring one character, some you are exploring more their relationships with each other. These are some of the structures. Think about kind of overall, what will your, who is at the center of your show, and then what will be the way that your show is going to evolve on a large scale, not just your pilot, but the entire series. When we talk about the world of your show, we're talking about literally the kind of world that it takes place in, not just setting and time period, but more specifically, sometimes things like neighborhood or what we call milieu, right? The kind of place that it takes place in, be that a workplace or a kind of home or a specific microcosm of the world. Some shows are like really big scope. They deal with a really big world, like Game of Thrones, for example. Some are very small. Think about what world is your show set in, and why is it good to do a show about it? World is one of the two big pillars of a TV series. The other is character, and we'll talk about that. But really, you're inviting an audience to live in the world of your show. So why would they want to live there? In what way have we never seen this world before? That's what's one of the things that's going to make your show feel original. And then why do your characters have to live in this world? You have to have that connection between the two, between the characters and the world. That's an integral thing. Something about the characters makes them have to live in this world or want to live in this world. It's the only world that they could live in for your show to work. Your world doesn't have to be big and complicated and spectacular like Game of Thrones. That's not a requirement. It just has to be very specific, so that we feel like we're stepping into that little bubble of your show. And we get a sense of what it's like to live in your world, and also how your characters evolve. Like I said, there's deep connection there. The world impacts your characters, and your characters might change the kind of world that they're living in as well. You really want to research your world. Even if it's one that you create entirely, it's probably based on certain real world ideas. Authenticity, meaning that it feels like you really know what you're talking about and the world actually exists, is very, very compelling. That's what makes shows very attractive to buyers, is that sense that you truly know what you're talking about. So research your world, especially if you're setting your show in a place that you're not familiar with, or a milieu that you're not familiar with. It's imperative that you become an expert on that, so that every tiny detail of the world can feel really accurate and really authentic and very real for your audience. And then our point of view into the world is going to be your characters. And that's really the core of your show. They say, in real estate, it's location, location, location. Like, that's really what matters. In TV, it's character, character, character. We are ultimately here to follow characters. You will notice this is very different from features that are really about story or plot, which is not to say that plot isn't important, because we're about to spend much of this webinar on it. But it's really, your show really centers on characters. That's why we're here. strong, unique characters can sell a show where the concept actually doesn't feel like that original by itself. A family soap, for example, or a cop show, or aliens invading. We've seen lots of those things, but if your characters are really unique and layered and strong, then the show will still feel fresh. Whereas even if your concept is really intriguing and you have a cool hook, if your characters are underdeveloped and feel generic, then your show will feel like it's sort of not executed well, or doesn't feel like it could go on for a long time because we don't have characters who have a lot of depth to explore. So how do you pick characters to enter the story through? Who makes for a good character to use as your point of view on your world? It's characters whose view on that world is different and unique and fresh, because that's what's going to make your idea feel fresh. So choose characters who are the most active. Then they can drive your story if they're active and doing things. Choose characters who have the most at stake so that there are stakes to your show. We were talking about that. Who connect emotionally with the audience. The audience has to connect emotionally with your characters, or they just won't stick around. Who have something in their backstory that drives them. That's what's going to give them their motivation, that internal drive. And who have a flaw that will get in their way. If nothing is getting in their way, then you're going to have a lack of conflicts, and you won't be able to put together scenes that have a lot of conflict and a lot of drama with characters who are all perfect. So compelling characters, how do we create really compelling characters? And sometimes writers are told that their characters need to be likable, and I never like that term. Your characters don't need to be likable. Lots of characters out there are definitely not likable. I don't know that there's a single character in Succession who's truly likable. I wouldn't go that far, but they're relatable, and they're definitely interesting or compelling. That's the key. Well-developed characters aren't types, they're real people. They feel like they actually live. So I don't know if you've had that feeling that when a show ends, you feel like you're losing your best friend or breaking up with somebody. That's why, because they feel like real people. But TV characters embody universal themes. So they're relatable because everyone kind of knows someone like this in a sense. We were just talking about this. Layered characters have some internal conflict. A lot of times that comes out of a conflict between how they see themselves. If you ask them what kind of person they are, they would give you one answer, but then how they relate to other people is a completely different story. So their estimation or view of themselves is really not accurate. And that gives them an internal conflict. For a series, characters need to have shades of gray and layered backstories. Like I said, perfect people, or for that matter, completely evil people don't make for compelling characters because they don't have a layered, we can't like unwrap them layer by layer, episode to episode, if they are just one way. Main characters have to be active for us to want to follow them. That's what you want the audience to do, is to follow your characters, but follow is a verb. You can't follow anybody who isn't leading, who isn't active, who's not going somewhere. So your main characters have to be going someplace so we can follow them. Sometimes I see characters who are starting out like directionless or ordinary. They're like the average person who start out with no goal or motivation. But the problem is that we only really care about characters who care about something. And so these kinds of characters who are ordinary or don't have any goal aren't really interesting to us, because if they don't care about anything, then it's hard for us to care about them too. But the audience may see goals and motivations that the characters don't see in themselves. So at what point in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel do you see that she would make a great comedian? A lot of writers immediately realize, well, scene one, long before she does. It's the same thing in The Expanse, where you really see, you know, what a great leader Holden is long before anyone else, long before he realizes it. And that idea of competence is very attractive. Competence meaning that the character is good at something, anything. They may not even realize that they're good at it, but the audience realizes that they're good at it. So let's talk about themes. Now that's we've gone through characters. And themes are, what is your show really about? We've already talked about what is your show about, world and characters and a story, right? But what is it really about? What are the meta themes, the big meanings? What does your show say about our world or about the human condition? What will the audience come away feeling or thinking about or discussing the next day? And that gives you the emotional connection between the audience and the characters, where that's coming from. This isn't a message you want to preach, because preachy shows are cringy. They're, you know, nobody wants to be preached to. We want to be entertained. But these are questions that you want the audience to consider as they watch your show or when they walk away. Like, what is the price of success? Or, you know, how can you love people who are, you know, who seem truly evil, or, you know, does the end justify the means? Those kinds of questions. And in my story maps, I've put down a number of different themes that these shows explore. And so you can see in there what are some of the themes and how the shows are handling those themes, how they're expressing them. There are lots of ways, but here are some. Marvelous Mrs. Maisel has throwaway lines. There's subtle buried dialogue where the themes are coming out. The Expanse has button lines, which are like those end, like highlighted pieces of dialogue. It's almost the opposite. A lot of shows have sort of key visual moments, like a tableau where you really see the theme coming through. Not necessarily those in the United States, but certainly globally, or anyone really familiar with the history of France knows my absolute favorite one in Lupin at the very beginning, where he's mopping the floor in front of Liberty leading the people. If you know that painting is all about like the principles of equality that France was founded on, then you realize there's a lot of, you know, question about what does equality really mean. That's one of the themes of the show, and it's really like a visual moment that is starting that out. You can also have kind of character moments that or introductions that are happening in mid-action, where you spotlight a character. And Lupin also does this in a really great way, where almost in mid-action, you will stop and highlight something about the character, have a line that really expresses the theme. And then, of course, visual style, music, sound design. Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is great at this, at expressing some of the themes through those elements. And lastly, we'll talk about tone. This is actually, I feel like Chris did an amazing job, better than I could ever do in his webinar, talking about different kinds of tone. And this is really having to do with how your story is told visually, and in terms of the types of events that take place, and even the sound design. In terms of visual content, when we talk about edginess, right? How pushing the envelope your show is, and how much the themes are really themes that are very much on the side where we are really pushing the envelope and addressing things that are difficult to talk about. which is when we talk about edginess. And also darker shows may have visual content like violence and sex, or darker emotional content as well. We talk about grounded versus world building tone in terms of the setting. How much does it feel really gritty, real, versus how much is it a world that you've built out? A distinct visual style or soundscape, like color scheme or music, like your Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. The pacing, some shows we'll talk about pacing at the end, focus on like intimate moments. Some are just going at a really fast pace, propulsive. Some do a little bit of both, back and forth, that are really lurching. They alternate these very fast, propulsive sequences with small character moments. So The Expanse is like that. And of course, humor. And there are many different kinds of humor. Your show isn't just funny, it's funny how. Is it dialogue-based humor? Is it situational? Is it about it being absurd or social commentary? What kind of humor? So those are really the elements that you want to think about before you even start writing. So now let's talk about your pilot in much more specific terms. First of all, let's talk about page count. Like, how long should it be? That's one of the first questions that I usually get. So for a 1 hour show, your pilot should be somewhere between 55 and 65 pages, 65 being really an upper limit. Somewhere around 60, give or take. It's roughly 1 page for 1 minute on screen. Broadcast shows tend to be faster paced. So even though the show is technically only somewhere around 42 to 45 minutes, like The Expanse, you still have that 50 to 60 page page count, or maybe even a tiny bit more, but it moves so quickly. 1 page is actually less than 1 minute, that you can cover that. And we call 45-minute shows 1 hour shows. I realize that sounds strange, but they, with breaks, they would fill out an hour. Yes, you will see some streaming scripts by established showrunners that are longer, that are anticipating that there will be some cuts along the way, especially an earlier draft of the script. That doesn't mean that you get to do that. I will tell you that the very first thing I do, and that executives do, is flip to the last page of your script to see how long it is. And when it's really long, when it's 70 or 75 pages, it, honest to God, it's less likely to get read right away, I think, because there's that psychological feeling of, oh, wow, this is really long. So really watch that length and try to fit into that time frame. And if you write efficiently and densely, you should be able to do that. Also, as you're writing, really keep in mind that 1 page for 1 minute on screen, and time out in your head how long things take. So you can't write something like they have dinner. That would be a whole scene. Like, how long is that actually going to take on screen? And however long it takes to, I don't know, stab someone to death, for example, that's how long it should, that's how much detail you want to write out. So if it takes a whole minute to kill someone, then it should be an entire page. Does that make sense? You can't have it be 3 lines, because then your script won't time out correctly. Let's talk about act structure. So 1 hour shows have usually 5 acts, sometimes only 4, and they have a possible teaser. And a teaser is not really mandatory. A lot of 1 hour shows have a teaser, but don't feel like I must write a teaser. It's actually optional. And the number of 1 hour shows do not have a teaser. So here's your act structure roughly by page count. If you do have a teaser, we're kind of counting the page count in Act 1, if that makes any sense. So your teaser can be anywhere from 2, which is really short. I should kind of change that, 3 or 4, to up to all the way to like 10 pages, which is really long. And then Act 1 should be about 12 to 15 pages total. And if it, in addition to your teaser, it kind of depends. If there is no teaser, then it may be a little bit longer, because it should end around 1/3 of the way. So around page 20, give or take. Doesn't have to be exact. But Act 1 will take up roughly 1/3 of your script. Act 2, it will be 6 to 10 pages, usually ending around page 30. Act 3, maybe a little bit longer, 8 to 12 pages, usually ending around page 40. Act 4 usually is, again, like a little bit longer. Occasionally it can be a little shorter. It's 6 to 12 pages, possibly all the way up to the end if there is no Act 5. And then Act 5 should be really short, somewhere around 2 to 8 pages, and you'll see why. Act 5 is always pretty short at the very end. That's a rough guide. It's not like you have to hit those page numbers exactly, but if you're really off, chances are your structure is really off. That's kind of the first hint that I get looking at a script of, is there proper pilot structure here? Are the acts roughly timing out around these page counts? Your act breaks don't have to be marked in your script, and you will see, I think, in all the scripts that we're providing, that the act breaks are not marked, or they may not be. That's okay. In most cable and streaming scripts, they are not marked, but that doesn't mean they're not there. The act breaks are most definitely there, and you can find them if you're looking for them. If you know how pilot structure works, you're going to start spotting those act breaks. I always say to writers that it's actually helpful when you're just in your draft stage before you're sending it to anyone to mark the act breaks for yourself in your script, as if it were a broadcast show. And just, keep in mind that there'll be, if you, do a page break, then your page count, you have to keep that in mind. But it can be very helpful so that you see the structure visually for yourself. And then you can always take them out at the very end. But you definitely want that act structure. So all pilots, this is what we really came here to talk about, is pilot structure. And believe it or not, all pilots have the same structure. This is really coming out of the nature of this medium and how it works. And it only really works one way, I think. The truth is that half-hour pilots have the exact same structure. It's just shrunk down to 30 minutes instead of 1 hour, right? But they all have actually the exact same structure, and that's in 3 acts instead of 5. But other than that, everything else kind of stays the same. This is the basic essential structure, and again, this is kind of a table of contents because we're going to go through each of these in detail. Your pilot starts out with the status quo, basically how things are before the show really begins, before your pilot really begins. I put the next one in red because it's so important. There is a pilot launch, a launch to your pilot story. Some people call this an inciting incident, and I can understand why, but I like to call it a launch because really your pilot needs to take off like a rocket. It actually needs to lift off and launch. So that will be that initial moment where your story begins. Then there will be escalation as stakes rise, and we'll talk about that. And your pilot will have a midpoint, a definite turn right around the halfway point. Then there will be more complications as your pilot becomes more intricate. There will be a climax, and we'll talk about that. And then again in red, a series launch. And if the first half looks very familiar, if you've written features before, it all the way up to midpoint and even maybe complications, I can understand why that's very similar, but now we're going to go completely different from features, right? Now the structure is going to depart entirely, because rather than closing something, we're opening something. And again, we need now for the series to lift off and launch and open rather than close. So we have these 2 launch moments where we make the pilot take off, and then where we make the series take off. And then you'll have a short resolution. Because it still needs to end, right? There still needs to be some sense of an ending to your pilot, as opposed to just, it cuts off. So that's our essential structure. All pilots have multiple plot lines. This is another big difference from features. If you only have one story, you're going to run into problems. For one thing, you won't have enough story and enough characters to fill out an entire series, right? To fill out many, many, many hours of content. Also, you will have an issue with cutaways, that there is no in features, you can have these kinds of jump cuts. A lot of times it's a stylistic thing, but in TV, you really can't do that. There's no like leader that you can put in your script. Instead, you want to intercut. And the only way to intercut is to have multiple plot lines, right? Otherwise, you have nowhere to cut to. So we label them by letters, A, B, C, potentially D stories. And we usually like decide what's A, B, or C by the order of importance of the characters. And then they can trade off sometimes episode to episode about which one is more important than another one. Each storyline actually has its own story engine or main conflict. And each character has their own goals and their own stakes, right? So each one will mimic this structure. You're going to build out an A story with your main character, but then there'll also be a B story. And usually that goes to kind of a key dramatic element, a big part of your show. That could be mythology, if your show is a genre show, a world building show. It could be an ally of your main character, a supporting character. That could be a love interest also. It could be an antagonist. In an episodic show where the case of the week is the A story, the season arc would be the B story, the arc of the characters. It could be about the character's backstory, like in Lupin. And then you could have a C story about some other supporting characters. And you could even have a D story if you have a big ensemble like Succession, or if there's some way that you want to kind of go into the world a little bit deeper and explore kind of another part of the world that maybe you didn't get to in the other storylines. I strongly suggest that you not try to go for more than that. It's hard enough to keep 3 balls in the air at the same time. 4 is a stretch. More than that, you won't be able to manage, I promise. So really try to stick to those storylines. It's very hard to try to do both, to try to do more. The multiple plot lines allow you to build increasing layers and complexity that is going to provide you with enough material for a whole series. It will show the conflict, that central conflict, the story engine, from different sides and points of view, give you a few different access points into your story. When your characters meet, when your storylines join, your characters coming together will help provide those moments when your storylines are coming together and where conflicts can occur. Again, it will provide cutaways. If you intercut, you can pass time, right? Then time will pass in one storyline while you're with another storyline. So how many characters and how many stories should I have in my pilot? Well, if you have too many, then your pilot will turn out to be too dense and kind of feeling like it's overcomplicated. And the problem is that then you won't have enough space for, you'll have too much story, which means that you will not be able to have enough character development or world building. And remember, your show is really about character and world rather than about plot. So if you take up all your time with plot, you're gonna shortchange yourself on page space for the other 2 things that you really need to do. You will be surprised when you look at pilots really deeply, just how simple their storylines really are, that they hit all these structural milestones, but that's really it. They're not super complicated. In each of these pilots, look at how relatively simple the stories are. If you have too few though, if you only have one storyline, then there just won't be enough depth. Your story will feel like there's not really a whole series here. There's just one story, one plot line. And you will see in all of these pilots that there are multiple plot lines, multiple storylines. So let's begin with our, I'll take a quick drink of water, but we're going to begin our journey into the nitty-gritty of the structure with your teaser. And again, you may or may not have one. You were just made jump into Act 1, and that's fine. But a lot of shows do have a teaser, and a lot of writers like to write teasers. They can be fun to write. A teaser is really an opening sequence, right? And the idea is to suck in the audience. Those opening pages are crucial. I can't emphasize this enough. Those first 10 pages, and you see like those first 10-page reviews, right, that you can get notes on, that's because they're crucial. If those don't grab your audience, and your first audience are, of course, producers and executives, if they're not grabbed, they may not even keep reading. So this is really, really important. You want to start with an opening sequence that has some movement to it, that has some dynamic images that kind of show the energy of the show, but that also start into those key elements, the characters and the world. The idea is that just a cool opening visual isn't really going to work if it's disconnected from the story and doesn't give us any insight into any of the characters or the world of your show. Then it's just kind of a cool visual, but it's not really the start of your show. You want to introduce your main character, ideally, or a main character, in an active and unique way. Tell us their place in the world. One of the things that happens very often is that you place your lead in a very tense or odd or challenging situation where they do something highly unusual that will grab our attention. This is great because it establishes your character and immediately establishes the world and gets us right into kicking off the story. So it kind of does all of those things, right? Defining the character and the world and establishing their goal and getting us right into things immediately. If you have some kind of framing device where like the beginning and the end are like bookends, then of course that beginning would be in the teaser. You do really want to show your world. That's very important to kind of show the main setting, maybe establish the time period or that milieu. And part of that is setting the tone of the show, which you want to set right away. The audience then can expect what kind of show they're going to be watching. A lot of teasers give us a hint to the main themes of the show in action or dialogue. And a hint as to the story engine of the show, what that central conflict is. In any case, whatever there might be in there, you really want to have that strong final beat, that strong final image that gives a compelling hint of what's about to come in Act 1. Sometimes that's a question, sometimes that's a big discovery. You want to end on something that will make the audience want to keep watching into Act 1. Which is not only your longest act usually, but maybe the most important, again, because this is the first thing, the most important thing that your audience will see. If your Act 1 is not working, nothing else after it will work. If it works really well, the pilot will usually unfold itself because it's relying on everything you've started. And so everything just kind of falls into place after it. So it's really important to nail this first part, and then everything else will be easier after that. This act needs to do a lot. It has to carry a lot of weight also. You have to push your characters into action to pursue their goals, confront obstacles, all of those things, right? You've got to start your story. And your Act 1, because of that, kind of has its own beginning, middle, and end. And you will see how that develops. So you have to start that pilot story and set up that story engine, that conflict. At least in your A story, so that your main character starts to pursue their goal. But we usually like to also set up at least some of the subplots, maybe not all of them, but at least one more. Usually all lead and some supporting characters are introduced, maybe not all of them, certainly not in a C story. That might come in later, like it does in The Expanse, for example, but you want to do all those character introductions. By the way, as an aside, you can also introduce key characters in episode 2. That's very frequent that some characters won't come in, but your core cast, comes in episode 1. I'm sure if you watch Succession, you see that, right? That there's a core cast that's introduced in the pilot, and then there's additions as you go. You want to give exposition. You have to give a little bit of backstory, and you definitely have to set up the world. And we'll talk about all of these in a moment, and we'll talk about exposition a bit more. You want to start getting those themes integrated and establishing the genre, the format, setting the tone. By the end of that first act, I should kind of have an idea of what your show is going to be like and what it's going to be about, who it's about, what world it takes place in, what your story is about generally. Kind of should have a good idea of your pilot, but also your series. So that I already have a sense of the, I could name the genre, I could kind of talk about the format of the show by the end of Act 1, and really setting the tone. And as an aside here, in terms of setting the tone, if you're going to have explicit content in your show, it's a good idea to put some of that up front so that the audience kind of gets a sense of this show has a lot of sex or a lot of violence. Like, don't hide that until the very end. That kind of feels like a bait and switch to the audience of we thought it was one tone and then in reality it's something else. You will see that in all of these pilots, if you look in all of our examples, that they do that. They set up the tone right from the start. So here are the elements. The first part is, like we said, the status quo, the world as it is before our story begins. And part of that world is, of course, our character introductions and their goals and their motivations, which is their two main things, right? What actual specific goal they are pursuing in the pilot, an external tangible goal that a person could attain in theory. Not something big and ethereal, like they want success. That's not a real goal. In what form does that take for them right this minute? And then their motivation. Why do they want that internally? What drives them to attain that? A lot of times writers think that our default position as the audience is that we care about your characters. We don't. Our default position is apathy. We actually do not care about our fellow human beings. I think the recent history of the world has amply demonstrated that we really couldn't care less about each other. That's just the way, human beings are. You have to make us care by making your characters memorable, by hooking us in. It's kind of a catch-22. We don't care until we care. So you have to pull us in. And that's about showing your characters as relatable, as people that we can emotionally connect with. And like I said, competence can be a very strong aphrodisiac. We tend to really gravitate toward people who have that sense of being kind of good at something, even if the thing that they're good at is pretty evil. It can really help to have a moment alone with the audience. To have like that intimate moment where we see a character's inner conflict or a secret that they have, or we see kind of the emptiness in their life, what they're missing in their life. That can be very, very powerful to have that initial alone moment. That's exactly, by the way, how I don't know why I keep referring to Succession, but that's exactly how Succession starts, right? With an intimate alone moment with Logan and then with Kendall, right? That's exactly how we begin. If you have an ensemble cast, you want to introduce your characters 2 or 3 at a time to establish those relationships. We can't meet 20 people at once. I'm sure you've had that experience of sitting in a big meeting and everyone goes around and introduces themselves. At the end, you can't remember who anyone is. That doesn't work. You really have to go little by little, one after the other. The Expanse has an absolutely brilliant sequence of introducing its relatively big cast on the Canterbury in that kind of sequential way. And I highlight that in my story map. And I strongly encourage you to look at that incredible sequence where in the space of like 7 minutes, we meet like 9 characters and actually remember all of them. You want to give backstory to your characters, but only as needed. I don't know I'm sure you've gone on like a first date before. When you first meet someone, you don't sit them down and ask them to tell you about their entire life, right? Where were you born? Where did you go to school? Who are your parents? Like, we don't need their whole life because we don't care. Until you start to like somebody and care about them, you really kind of don't want to know everything about their their life up to this moment. You only want to know things as they become relevant from getting to know them. So resist the temptation to, for example, use lots and lots of flashbacks because you want to catch the audience up about everything that's been important in this character's life. Think about it. Do I care right now? I want to meet this person where they are right now. And then as things become relevant, I will learn about those things in dialogue or action or in some other way. And then put us into the character's point of view, put us into their head. That way you can hook us emotionally. If your characters don't really talk very much, for example, or if they're just not on screen very much, then we're going to be kept at arm's length from them. We're not going to be in their heads, and it's impossible to connect with someone in that way. So the other thing you have to do is exposition, right? You have to give backstory for that emotional connection. That's one part of the exposition, is that backstory. And then also you have to set up your world, and that's also exposition. And exposition is hard because it's boring by definition, because you're downloading information to the audience. So you have to generate interest, which means conveying information in a form that feels kind of organic, meaning that it's naturally part of the flow of your pilot and it feels needed at that moment. The audience feels like, I need to know this information. One very frequent way of doing this is what we call a newcomer. A newcomer is a character who's coming into the situation of the show for the first time. And that person can be very valuable because they have to meet everybody and see the world and learn about it from the same point of view as the audience. The audience is new to this, and now we have created a character who's new to this too. The great thing is that now everybody can introduce themselves and it won't feel weird, and everybody can explain what this world is like and it won't feel weird. The Expanse has so much exposition to do that they literally use like every technique that there is for world building, for exposition. So it's like a textbook list of all ways to do exposition. And they have a character, Dimitri, who's really pretty much just solely created for this purpose, to be the newcomer. The other one is arguments, which provides conflict and drama. And it also provides a great way for characters to naturally talk about things that would be weird to talk about calmly. So if you have a divorced couple, they usually don't discuss the problems that led to their divorce for no apparent reason, just like that. But if they're fighting about their current situation, then they may dredge up old grudges, right? That's much more, that way you can learn about their life up to now. If you watch all of these pilots and pretty much every other show, not just pilots but regular episodes, but especially in a pilot and especially in Act 1, count the number of arguments. If we fought this much in real life, we wouldn't be able to exist. We do not argue this much with our fellow human beings. It would be exhausting. But in pilots, there are lots of arguments, one after the other. And it's because that's a great way to build conflict and drama, and also to download information. And then setting is a key creative element of your show, remember, and how your characters are actually responding or are part of that world. And so use the visual medium. A lot of exposition can be done visually by what we see. And again, all of these and more. And I try to highlight as many as I can in my Expanse story map, although you may find others that I didn't even get to, of all the different ways that they do exposition. When you have a pilot like that, that takes place in an alternate universe, not in our world, then you also need to convey the rules of that universe. In our world, the regular laws of nature apply, right? And anything that doesn't feel like it's it follows the regular laws of nature, we presume is a dream or a fantasy or hallucination, right? That's kind of how we sort of assume that. But in an alternate world, you have to show us by examples what can and cannot happen. And what cannot happen is actually more valuable, because what you want is to set the limits of that world where things become problematic. If anything can happen, then there are no stakes, right? Then the there are no consequences to the character's actions. If at any moment some force can come down and pluck you out of danger, then nothing is ever dangerous. If at any moment the earth can open up and swallow you up for no reason, then it doesn't matter whether you make good choices or bad, because hey, right? So rules have to be clear and consistent for us to feel any sense of jeopardy. And this is why if you have characters with superpowers, for example, they can't have unlimited powers, because then nothing is ever at stake for them. So the last, or maybe most important part of your first act is that launch point, that inciting incident. And that's answering the question, why are we entering the story at this particular moment? What is changing in this world and our characters? Why do we begin today as opposed to yesterday or tomorrow? Each storyline needs to have its own launch, right? Not just the A story, but all the other stories too. They have separate launches because at this point, usually your storylines will be separate. So they will have their own launch, and you will see all of the launch points highlighted in those story maps. This is an event or a conflict that upsets that status quo. It stops your characters to consider their motivations, and it presents them with a dilemma, like what's next? You have to show your characters actually responding to that change by starting to pursue a new goal, setting themselves a new goal, or setting out on a new journey. So it's not just about like, here's that change, but it's more about your characters. How do they respond to that? What do they do as a result of that? At this point, part of that launch point is us understanding what the character hopes or expects will happen. That will give us some sense of anticipation. If you asked your character, what do you think will happen next? What would be their answer? Which probably won't be accurate, but what would they expect to happen? And then what larger obstacle will they need to overcome within the pilot, and what are the stakes of that? What do they stand to gain or lose? And what is that obstacle to their goal? This can actually sometimes be a small but significant moment, or it can be something really, really obvious, right? Like something like a newcomer or announcement, or a big move. It can be, but sometimes it's actually what looks like a small moment, even though it's really pretty big. In Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, one of the launch point to that A story is Midge's discovery that her husband has stolen his act, that it isn't actually original. It shatters her view of how things have been, of really him and the entire world. Like sort of falls apart. She even says that she now needs to apologize to her best friend for the way that she behaved about a recipe, because suddenly everything she's thought to be true has broken, right? And she has to respond to that. And her first response is to say, oh, wow, okay, I guess I need to look at my world very differently. So how do I bring my audience into, how do I bring the audience into my pilot? How do I make them connect with my pilot and really want to keep reading? And here's sort of a little checklist that you can go through. First of all, make the audience experience your world, your show, with all their senses. Make it visual. Make it sound interesting. We forget sometimes it's not just visual, it's also, and it's not just dialogue, right? There's sound design and as well as music. You make it feel like we could reach out and touch it or smell it, right? Really, or even taste it. Really make it something that feels like we can step into it. Give your audience stakes early on. Make them care about what do the characters stand to win or lose. Draw them in one character at a time or two, right? Really give them moments with each character. Don't rush into the story. We have to connect with those characters through those introductions. Vary the pacing of scenes. You do want to advance and or launch these storylines, but again, you also want to have those character moments so that we see their point of view. Don't confuse the audience on purpose, thinking that, well, the cool thing is that they're going to be lost and don't understand what's going on, but later we will put together the puzzle and resolve it all for them. The audience has to understand what's going on, or at least has to think they understand what's going on in order to be invested. And Lupin is really a great example of this, because what we think is going on turns out not to be the case at all. Spoiler alert. But it's not that we're confused, we're just misdirected. We understand perfectly what's happening. It's just that later we will find out that that wasn't really, that it was all a sleight of hand. And these next two things seem contradictory, so bear with me. You want to start as late into the world as possible, when the world is ripe for that change to occur. You don't want your pilot, in other words, to be a prequel. Like, here's all the information you need to know before our story actually begins, and our show will begin in episode 2. I see this way too frequently. Can I just start in episode 2 then, and I'll learn what I need to learn as we go? You don't want to do that, where the world of your show and the characters of your show in the pilot are different from everything else after it. This has a whole bunch of reasons, partly also that your cast should be your cast. Nobody wants to be in your pilot and then not be in your series. But a large part of it is that you want your pilot to start when the show is ready to start, when your world is ready for that launch moment. But at the same time, you want to actually start that story as early in the pilot as possible. You also don't want to put that that pilot launch at like halfway through or the end, where in the first half of the pilot, for example, nothing really happens and everyone is just kind of going along, right? We can't wait. The story has to begin very early on. Some of the best pilots begin their story practically immediately, even in the teaser, like just right away, they get into it. Lupin starts like very, very early into the first act, where we start to get into the story of the necklace and all that, right? That starts very, very quickly. So what happens at the end of the act? When you're done, now what? All act outs are really the same. So let's just talk about the act 1 out, and then this will repeat at the end of each act. The end of the act is a turn that shows where the story is going. And it's often a response to kind of a surprising moment. But notice the word response. It's not just the surprising moment, it's how the characters respond to that. But they're all moments of turn or conflict or crisis. So you see my arrows? The act break is at the top of the tension, not when something has resolved. If you have your conflict, it's not that it, escalates, resolves, and then the act break happens. The act break happens at the height of that. It's almost like if you feel like your act break is in the wrong place because it's in the middle of something, there you go, you've nailed it. But it's not an oh my God moment on its own, because what may seem to you like an oh my God moment, the audience is like, okay, but so what? Why do I care about this? It's a big reveal, but okay. It's a here we go moment. It's trying to push you into the next act so the audience keeps going. So it's the beginning of something new. And by having the characters actually respond to that oh my God moment, however briefly, even it's with a reaction that shows what they think about it and why they care about it, it's a here we go and we're off moment that escalates the stakes and turns the story and pushes it into the next stage where it's a sense of more to come. And you've seen these, there's a surprising turn of events or a new mystery or shocking reveal. And again, the act breaks are there, even if, even if they're not marked. I'm just looking at my notes, trying to kind of think like, okay, what's really a very, a really kind of really good way to do it. And there are lots and lots of them that are, that you can do. I think we want to go to break, so we can come back and talk about them. But it's usually this kind of big turn moment. We already actually talked about that big turn moment in Mrs. Maisel, come to think of it. So we've already talked about a couple of them. So Amanda, do you want to go to break at this point? We're kind of in that halfway point. And since we are, we'll be right back after these commercial messages. That's our act break. Are you there? Amanda?
Sorry, Anna, my
Okay.
my Zoom tray got stuck underneath my computer, so I had to get a chance to pull it back up. Yeah, I love that. I love that we're at the act out and then we're going right into commercials. So it's a little bit of a break, which is great.
Yes, even though on Netflix there are no commercials, but we're going to take a commercial break anyway. Now
That's
from our sponsor.
That's true. A word from our sponsor at Netflix. No, yeah, no problem. So Anna, if you want to, why don't you go ahead and stop sharing your screen right now? Turn off your microphone, turn off your camera. And then you guys, we're just going to take about a 5-minute break right now. So if anybody needs to, take a stretch, run to the restroom, we're going to take about 5 minutes off right now. And in the meantime, for those of you who are sticking around, I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about some really cool things that I think can help you with your personal career. So, all right. So Anna, do you mind doing a stop screen share?
I'm trying to, sorry, I'm like, where is my Zoom controller? That's what I'm kind of trying to find. Sorry about that.
That same thing just happened with me. My tray got stuck underneath the my screen. I can't get it out.
I feel like, sorry about that. There's now going to be, I'm not able to do that, but I think if I just, I can't seem to find the
No worries.
way.
No worries, Anna. What I'll do is I'll just switch the screen share over to mine. So that's
That'd be great. Sorry, it is like buried. This is what's happening to me too.
No problem. No problem. All right. So I will switch screen share over to me. And give me guys, give me just 1 second. All right. All right, great. All right, so we are good. So hopefully, Anna, you're able to find your tray. Great. All right, so hi, everybody. Good to see you again. For those of you who joined late, just to introduce myself, my name is Amanda, and I am the managing director here at Stage 32. I have overseen our education for the last 10 years, believe it or not, over 2,000 hours of education like this that I have programmed in the Stage 32 community. So I'm just going to go over a few things with you guys today while Anna takes a little bit of a break and you guys take a break from all the information that has come in. I have been monitoring, and Kristen, who is our education coordinator, we have been monitoring all of the chats that have been coming in, all of the questions that have been coming in. And what we did is we pulled out all of the most frequently asked questions that are coming up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat box right now a link for you guys to go to this page. And on this page, we have created a facts section. This is where you signed up for the webinar right here on whether or not you could watch this on demand. And one thing to let you guys know is that you do need a Stage 32 profile in order to watch this video. So if you do not have a Stage 32 account, please make sure you go to stage32.com and create an account. It's free. Our community is free. It takes 30 seconds to join. So just to let you guys know, you will have access to this recording. A lot of people are asking of how do you get the story maps? We are handing out the story maps with the on-demand version. So once you watch the on-demand video, you will have them all as a download as a PDF underneath your on-demand video. So you can find the all of the Mrs. Maisel and Succession and Expanse and Lupin. Those will all be PDF downloads in the on-demand version. When will this recording be ready? It takes us about 24 to 48 hours to process it. And then once it's ready, you will be able to find your recording by clicking once you're logged into your Stage 32 account, you will click your settings right up here in the top right-hand corner. And then you will click your purchase history right here, and you can find your recording right there. A lot of you are asking if you could get a copy of the presentation. The presentation itself is a property of Stage 32 and Netflix, so you will not be getting a copy of the actual presentation, but you do have access to the recorded version, and you can watch that as many times as you'd like. So you'll be able to see the slides on the recorded version. Where is the lounge that we're discussing in the webinar? I'm going to put this in the chat box for everybody. And if you're watching this on demand, I'll put this in the resource sheet. So you guys can watch that lounge. So you guys can contribute to that lounge after you are set. And then where do you see the other webinars in the series? I've linked all of the Netflix webinars here on this page. So everything you can find is under the FAQ section right there. So I think I've covered a lot of the FAQ that we are seeing in the chat box. So thank you, Kristen, and thank you everybody for your comments on that. So I wanted to take just a few minutes, so while Anna takes a break here, just to kind of talk to you guys a little bit. I see that we have a lot of new people here who may not be part of the Stage 32 community. So I wanted to take just a few minutes to share with you guys what an incredible tool Stage 32 is for you in your career. And so I wanted to start by putting the Stage 32 lounge link that we're all talking in. And just to kind of give you an idea of how global the reach of the Stage 32 community, this is who's in the webinar right now. I mean, we have people from Brazil, Austria, London, the United States, Argentina, Kenya, Hungary, you name it. And, we have such a vibrant, incredible community from all over the world. So no matter where you're tuning in from, the one thing that we are realizing that creativity is universal, and it's not specific to your region. Creativity is in fact global. So this is incredible. You guys are instantly connected with like-minded people in the Stage 32 community once you create a profile. So Stage 32 is open 24/7, 365. You don't have to wait for the next film festival or the next market. You can be networking with people in the community on the creative side and the professional side 24/7, 365. So make sure that you join the community, and I created this lounge topic in particular so you guys can all meet each other, connect with each other, and stay in touch with each other and share what you're learning from here. So a little bit more about Stage 32. I want to go over just very quickly the 3 pillars of Stage 32. And the first pillar of Stage 32 is the networking side of the platform. I'm sure most of you have heard of LinkedIn or heard of Facebook, and a lot of what Stage 32 exists within that first pillar of networking is we've created a professional community where you can network similar to LinkedIn or Facebook, but it's specifically catered to the entertainment industry. So we have creatives and professionals from all over the world in the Stage 32 community. Now, one of the things that we have is our Stage 32 lounge. And within the lounge, we have all aspects of creating film, television, or digital. So we have everything broken down by whatever discipline you're in. So filmmaking, financing, producing, acting, authoring, cinematography, screenwriting, post-production, transmedia, you name it. So no matter what you think, or no matter what discipline that you're in, we have a lounge for you so you can connect with like-minded people. And we have over 150,000 discussions going on in the Stage 32 lounge. So make sure you join, because if you are looking for your tribe, if you're looking for your community, you have found it. So just to give you an example of some of our lounges, if you are having any issues with your creative pursuits, you can post anything here in the lounge, and you will have nothing but support and positivity and encouragement from everybody within the Stage 32 Lounge. This community is just the most positive, most collaborative, and it's really the only safe space that we see on the internet, bar none. So all of the toxicity that you might feel from the broader based social media platforms like Twitter or Instagram, that gets thrown away. And within Stage 32, you have nothing but support in this community. So if you're an introvert, you are in a safe space where you're able to contribute to the lounges and feel the support and encouragement from people from all over the world. We have over 800,000 creatives. I think we're zoning in around 900,000. So we're getting close to 1 million people in this community. So imagine you have 1 million people of support for you on your creative journey. And much like other professional social networks, you're able to create your Stage 32 profile. And this is an incredible place for you to talk about who you are, what you've done, and you could talk about which projects you've worked on. You can link movies that you've worked on, television shows that you've worked on, and just share a little bit more about yourself. You can share your log lines, you can share your scripts, you name it. And so it's a great place for the creative community to interact. So that's a little bit more about the first pillar of Stage 32, which is really the networking side of things. So I'm going to move on to the second pillar of Stage 32, which is our education. And one thing that, oh, I'm sorry, wrong thing, which is our education. And one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link here in the chat box for everybody to our education. And I specifically tagged our screenwriting education. One thing that's great about Stage 32 is that we are the leaders in entertainment industry education. There is no one in the world that has a larger library of education from us, a larger library of education on all aspects of the industry, above the line, below the line. No matter what your discipline is, we have something for you. And what's great about our educators is that we bring in people who are working on shows and on movies that you are seeing right now. We are bringing in people that are doing it right now, because the one thing about this industry is that it is changing day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. So we are bringing in anywhere between 4 to 8 classes or webinars or labs a week to make sure that you are the most up to date on what's happening in the industry. So whether you're working on your craft or whether you want to learn more about the business, we definitely can help you with any education for you. So I stuck that link in the chat box, and what's great is that we have, so for example, we have like Mike Gaio. He's teaching how to break in and excel in a TV writer's room. He works with Issa Rae, and he's currently on the Insecure show on HBO Max. And so we have great people like this that come in and teach exclusively for the Stage 32 community. And we make it affordable, so that way we can make sure that everyone from around the world can get access to this world-class education from our world-class leaders. So I stuck that in the education box, and then Kristen, who's our education coordinator, she's going to type into the chat box our direct email to myself and to Kristen. It's edu@stage32.com. So if you have any questions and need help on your own creative pursuits, just shoot me an email. I can recommend education for you. We work very closely with all of our mentors, and we are more than happy to help you. So the second pillar is our education. And then finally, our third pillar is our script services, which is our development services side of things. So Script Services is great. This is run by our Director of Script Services, Jason Murch. And Jason also is here in the chat box as well. And he is going to be, he's going to be sharing with you guys, his email address, which is j.merch@stage32.com. And he works literally with thousands of development executives, managers, agents, producers, financiers. Everyone that works on the professional side of the business comes to Stage 32 to serve as mentors. And the reason for this is for you to be able to work directly with someone with full transparency on your project. So you can get a real-time feedback from industry professionals that can make sure that when you are submitting your script to go to the marketplace, that it is marketplace ready. You want to make sure you're giving yourself the best possible way to do that. So I pulled it on a couple things just to kind of give you guys an idea of what we have in the script services side. So since we're talking TV today, one of the things that we've already covered with Chris Mack is TV pitch decks are a huge part of what you need to do now these days in order to get a TV project to the market. So through Stage 32, you're able to submit your pitch deck, and then we work with executives literally from all over the place. So you can speak with anybody that works with, Artwork Entertainment, which is a main management company, Disrupting Influence, which is a UK-based mini studio. So all of these people who specifically work in television, you can submit your pitch and come to this page and click on here, and then you will be able to be in contact and choose these people to review your pitch deck and review your pitch deck, and then give you notes and give you feedback to make sure that you are setting yourself up for the best possible success. And then the final thing that I'm going to share with you guys too is I'm sure you guys have pilots. I don't know about you, but sometimes when you submit for coverage, coverage is from an ambiguous reader that you're not really sure who they are or what they do. One of the great things that we have about Stage 32 is that you can choose an executive to read your pilot script, and then you can hop on the phone with them and they will give you direct feedback based on what they read. We have great people from NBC Universal, from WME, from Paramount Plus, and the list goes on and on. We have literally the best roster of mentors that you could possibly imagine. So if you're interested in having someone read your script and then hop on the phone with them, that is something that we are definitely known for through Stage 32. And I just stuck that in the chat box. So that's just a little bit about the Stage 32 community. We encourage you to join the community. It's free. 95% of what you see on Stage 32 is free, including the lounges, the looking for jobs, looking for blogs, networking, you name it. But if you are really considering a life in the entertainment industry as a professional, we do have professional development services that you can take that are just a world class that you will not find anywhere else. So that's a little bit more about Stage 32. And I think that Anna, I'm hoping that Anna, you are heading back on pretty soon. There she is. Perfect.
I'm right here.
All right, perfect. So you guys, if you have any questions, like I said, I stuck all of those links in the chat box. And if you're watching this on demand, they will be available as a resource sheet with links underneath the video. So you'll be able to grab those from there. So we're going to head on and finish up with the rest of the presentation. And again, stick around, you guys, because I am giving away something really, really cool at the end of this. And it actually has to do with open writing assignments for some major companies in the industry that only Stage 32 has access to. All right, Anna, keep kicking ass. And I'm going to turn it back on over to you.
All right, and I'm going to turn back to the screen share here. All right. Hopefully. There we go. All right. So, and we're back. And as we're back, as in a pilot, we're going to pick up where, right where we left off. So two quite different launch moments and act outs. For example, Lupin has that moment where the plan has been set and established to steal the necklace. And here we go, right? That's your launch to that storyline, is that we're going to do this thing, right? But how, right? It's sort of very unfinished. It's this new mystery of, how are we going to make this happen, and how is it going to go? And so we go out on that here we go moment. And actually, you'll see in my breakdown that Lupin's first act is so efficient. It does so much so quickly that actually the first act is it's shorter than it would normally be. And that's just because it does a very, very efficient job of doing that. It's around like 12 minutes in. And then versus, you can see in The Expanse, you have that SOS that call, right, that the Canterbury receives, but we don't just go out on, oh my God, there's an SOS, right? Which could be that reveal. What we go out on really is the decision to ignore that SOS, to not go. That's the kind of, that's the kind of, the launch is that the SOS is out there, right? But then there's a response, and ignoring something is a decision, right? It's a response. And what we really go out on is that response of the characters, and not just the captain's decision to ignore the SOS, but just as importantly, Ade's response of this is immoral, and then most importantly, of course, Holden's response of backing up the captain, while at the same time you can kind of tell that he has reservations. So it's a very kind of really good demonstration of how this works with that act out, as we go out on a here we go moment of, now what are we going to do with, we can tell that this surprising turn of events is going to have repercussions, right? We can't just leave it alone. And actually you will see that there, the act break comes kind of late, because we've had two totally separate storylines to launch that are working independently of each other. They are deeply connected, but only for the audience. The characters do not know about one another at all. But we know about both of them. And by now we also know the connection to the teaser. Like, to us, the entire thing has come together, but for the characters, of course, it hasn't. For a show like this with commercial breaks, and I put this in my story map, this is coming like 20 minutes in, but there's a value, since the audience is most likely to leave at that first commercial break. There's a lot of value in front loading the pilot with all of that, so that the audience is really deep into it by the time that break comes, and they're much more invested and much more likely to stick around, right? So that's why they kind of push it out and really want you deep into all the characters and all the stories. So those are a couple of demonstrations of how this works. And then we go into Act 2, okay? And Act 2 is all about escalation. It's up, escalating those conflicts. So every action, every obstacle, literally every scene is raising the stakes. It's taking the characters' goals, and one by one in each beat, it becomes harder and harder to achieve it. There are more and more obstacles. For every step forward, there's a step back. And more is at stake, right? There's more and more to lose. And the way this works is that at each beat, the characters make decisions that lead to consequences and therefore complications. And we'll talk about this in a moment a little bit more, that it's not that that more and more bad things befall the character. That would make the character a passive participant in the story, where they're the victim of a series of unfortunate events, is how I usually put it. That's not what you want. Then you've got a very passive character who's not driving the story is driving them, and they're like a passenger going along. Instead, you want an active character whose decisions are making things better or worse. Everything is coming out of what they have decided to do, and at each decisions have consequences, right? You decide to do something, it's going to have implications, and that's why things are moving along. At this point, like in The Expanse, for example, the plot lines can progress completely independently of each other, but the stakes have to be raised in each plot line. But they don't necessarily have to completely connect with each other. This is also the case for Lupin, where although the connection between, you know, in the flashback storyline is helping to establish his personal connection to the necklace, it's not quite clear exactly how yet in Act 2. The plot lines are progressing independently. So the elements of this, first you want to start with the result of the Act 1 out, right? We have this here we go moment, so we're going to start with where we left off. And the characters take stock of their new situation, of what has happened and what decision they have made. And at this point, you may need some more exposition to set up now what are the new conflicts. Having set a new goal, what does that imply? And then the characters need to take their first decision or action that will propel us forward from here. And then the characters have to face off. You want confrontations, right? Arguments and confrontations in action. And a number of those, in order to raise the stakes, are going to have to put your characters in a situation where they fail, where they lose something, where they're, you know, the victim of something in a sense. If they just keep succeeding, then you have a situation where the stakes are not rising. Particularly if the scenes are such that there's a new challenge in the scene and then it resolves, another challenge and then it resolves. You see how then for every step higher, we also take a step back. What you want to do is escalate and have new complications, new obstacles and threats that just pile up on one on top of the other. And you want to use those subplots, those B and C stories, to cut away from the A story so that we can progress multiple plot lines. Don't abandon your B and C stories. You want to use them and progress everything at the same time. And then, for example, this is, you know, how Lupin works. The present day and the past storylines are both progressing at the same time simultaneously. And we're using, you know, we're intercutting between the two of them. And then you have this midpoint halfway through where Act 2 ends. That is a major event or decision that turns the direction of the story. And sometimes each plot line, when the plot lines are truly separate, then they each have their own midpoint. Sometimes this is where two plot lines converge into one midpoint. The midpoint ups the stakes because it's one of two things. Either the characters go all in on their goal, or they decide, you know what, this isn't working. We're going to turn things and we're going to go about things a different way. So this may clarify the characters' goals as they go all in, or it may change their goal as they're going to do something, they're going to try it a different way now. Either way, it's pushing the action forward, like all act outs. And it will kind of give you a milestone, like how far we've come since the pilot launch, and then how far do we still need to go before the end. If you have a ticking clock, meaning a time crunch on how, you know, the characters only have so much time to accomplish what they need to do, this is where it would, you know, it would be set off, right? This is where the 7-minute clock literally starts in Lupin. This is where I think it's, you know, at this moment, this is where Logan makes this big announcement and sets that 4 p.m., you know, time clock. The ticking clocks are very frequent, partly because if the characters have like forever to accomplish their goal, then to some degree the stakes are lower than they were, right? Then you are not really upping the stakes. One of the ways to up the stakes is to say, this is a limited time offer. We're not going to let you have forever to accomplish your goal. So that Act 2 out is either a renewed or a changed journey. Again, a we're off moment. That gets us then into Act 3. And here the storylines are really going to intersect, which is going to further escalate the conflict. You're going to interweave overlap stories so that the main character can face off or work with some of the supporting characters. Sometimes the storylines still seem to run separately, but now they really intimately enmesh for the audience. We understand the connections between them, even if the characters are still sort of not necessarily together, if that makes sense. So here are the elements of that. again, the first thing that we do is kind of have this moment where we take stock of the situation, the consequence of the midpoint. How do the characters deal with that turn or that decision in terms of moving forward, right? And the higher stakes moving forward. You also have confrontations between characters, or what we call paralleling or a showdown. In Mrs. Maisel, you have that moment at that midpoint where Midge and Joel have a moment in the cab, and they there's a big turn because now they're opposing each other because the Joel show has gone so badly. And then the entirety of Act 3 essentially is one giant showdown between the two of them, and then also between Midge and her parents. And it's essentially all paralleling. One of the things that can happen here is what we call an assumption of power moment, a character defining moment where a character takes control or makes a bold move or kind of goes all in and takes charge of who they are. You don't always have that in Act 3, and also there's another opportunity to have that in Act 4, and usually it's not both. But Act 3 is one place where a character might kind of assert themselves and take charge of their own story and make a bold move, like, for example, leaving your wife. And that gets us into Act 4, and we'll talk about like how this act break happens in a second, or how it can happen. You may just have an act break at the end of Act 3 that is another repeat of the act break that we talked about. Act 4 is really, really key because this is where you're going to launch your series. Not in Act 5, but in Act 4. This is going to be very, very key, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. You have to put some effort into your supporting characters to either advance or to end those subplots, to at least bring them to a momentary conclusion. You are going to have a lot of personal conflicts that you've set up. So you need some character moments to really advance those personal conflicts, or again, bring them to a momentary resolution. A lot will be payoffs. This is where the dominoes fall. Everything you have set up is now going to unfold. This is where you have to deal with the consequences of the decisions that were made in Acts 2 and 3. And take actions to deliver on the promises that have been made, that the characters need to become who they were meant to be. If you didn't have an assumption of power moment before, this is it. Now they really have to have that that moment where they take command of their story. So you have some complications where the characters take steps toward their goal. They hit obstacles, they make discoveries, and a lot of payoffs to setups. And where the crossover of the stories, as they really enmesh together, will create new conflicts and new crisis moments that are unresolved, that are going to keep going into your series. So that it's not all resolution, it's more conflicts piled on, or deeper, bigger conflicts that you're going to have to resolve. So there are events that have consequences that go beyond the pilot. And really, what you're going to be spending your time on is a climax and then a series launch. These two things, one after the other. And there are lots of examples of this in these story maps. And I'll try to hit a couple of them here. So the climax can kind of straddle the act break between Acts 3 and 4, or can be entirely in Act 4. But essentially in a pilot, you have two different kinds of climax that are possible. And you will see now we have kind of left feature structure altogether, and we're off on a completely different kind of structural map. Because you really have two options to pick from. One is that the characters are hitting rock bottom. I give up, all is lost, that's that. Or they seem closer to their goal than ever. Mission accomplished, we're all good. A lot of times the characters have a realization or an epiphany about their situation, this sense of never mind or mission accomplished, right? They kind of realize that, and they formulate a plan, or they take a big risk, to overcome their challenges and achieve their goals. So there's sort of a momentary resolution to that pilot launch one way or the other way. And this provides a convergence point where the character conflicts and the plot lines are really coming together to a focal point. Like I said, this can be a bridge between the two acts. If you have an episodic, a case of the week show, you have a plot line that needs to close, right? The murderer has to be convicted, or the patients need to be cured, all that kind of stuff, right? So that conflict of the week is going to have to wrap up in Act 4, but there will need to be still that component, that consequence for the characters, where, for example, a team has come together, or there's some result that will keep the show going, a serialized element that will keep the show going. It is possible for your A story to have a rock bottom climax and your B story to have a mission accomplished climax, or vice versa, or they could be the same. It's not necessary that they be the same. Sometimes when the story is really about two opposing characters, it naturally works out, like in Succession, that if one character seems to be on top, then by definition it's a seesaw, so the other one has to be on bottom, right? And then that leads you into your series launch, and you'll see these two are integrally connected. Essentially in Act 4, sometimes when not all, there's a series launch, there's a climax for each storyline, right? We just talked about the fact that they're not necessarily the same type of climax, and there will be a series launch for each storyline as well, especially in a serialized show. In an episodic show, you won't have that for the case of the week, of course, that will wrap, but there will still be a series launch, right? And that I say that it's a bomb that goes off, although I don't mean, a literal bomb, although I have worked on pilots that had an actual bomb. That's going to show that your series has somewhere to go. We call it having legs, as in it can walk forward. Because a series depends on those character arcs, the characters transforming, but also a powerful question or a dilemma that the audience wants to follow and get answered. A choice that's made to pursue a goal that's connected to how the characters perceive themselves, or their beliefs, or their desires, what they want to have happen in their life. Or a monumental shift in the world where the characters have to react to it. Things can never be the same. Now we have to really respond to this big change. In a mini series or some limited series, this really is just fuel that you are going to burn off in subsequent episodes. You still need to, even though you're not starting an ongoing series, you still need fuel, right? To fuel your mission. You can think of it almost like a NASA mission to a distant planet where you have to stop along the way and refuel. But you really have to have all your fuel at the beginning, because there aren't going to be like gas stations along the way. I don't know, that's a terrible analogy, I guess. So you have to front load in this moment all of that larger conflict that will slowly burn off through the course of the episodes, all the questions that will need to get answered in the course of different episodes. So here are some examples of how your series might launch, and it may be more than one of these. It could be that there's some questions set up that have, or some problems that don't have answers at this moment, that the characters have to react to an event that launches multiple storylines for each character in terms of their dilemma and a new goal that they have to pursue, where each character has to set off on their own journey, bringing us back to their goal and their motivation. They each have to, it's almost like the pilot splits apart and kind of explodes into splinters, sending each character off on their own journey towards their own goal, this kind of multiple storylines. Sometimes the goal is seemingly reached in that climax, right? We're on top, mission accomplished. But the problem is bigger. The goalposts are moved. You thought that you got there, but you really are not there. You're going to have to go a lot further to accomplish your goal. So it's a reversal, right? All of these series launch points are reversals from the climax. if the character in the climax seemingly achieved their goal momentarily, now the goalposts are moved. Not so fast, not there yet. That brings the end of the show further out, not at the end of your pilot, but somewhere in the distant future. Or the opposite would be, well, actually an example of that would be in like an episodic show that a team has come together, which is, you know, a positive, to keep pursuing that goal, but not so fast because our team doesn't get along. They have tensions. That means that there's going to be problems in this team. And another way to think about this is that you've solved one problem, but it's whack-a-mole. If you're familiar with that game, you've uncovered many more. That for the one problem that you've solved, you have created a whole bunch of other problems or found a whole bunch of other problems that are going to have to be solved. The same idea of setting up a whole bunch of other questions that don't have answers. The other idea, of course, of the climax is that everything has fallen apart. We're lost, forget it. You know, this is, you know, show over. But then you have to launch your series with a glimmer of a solution that presents itself. So not so fast, you haven't lost yet. If you are willing to keep pushing, keep going, the goalposts are moved, you might just accomplish your goal. It's possible that things are going to turn around if you just keep working. Notice that this is not just a cliffhanger or a crossroads or a to be continued moment, because the audience has to care about what happens next. They can't just, you know, they can't just be left hanging, because then they're sort of like, well, okay, but you know, why should I come back? You notice that each of these are, we're going to push the end further out. We're going to move the resolution to this story to an indefinite future. And that's what's really launching that series, opening up rather than closing down. And there are examples of this in every single one of these breakdowns, and it's easier in a way when you see it all unfold. And then Act 5 may have a cliffhanger, or it may not. You know, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel doesn't end on a cliffhanger. Lupin doesn't end on a cliffhanger. So there doesn't have to be a cliffhanger. What you need in Act 5, what you need is that series launch, right, in Act 4. So that in Act 5, you can have a kind of temporary resolution. You think of Act 5 as almost the very first beat of your episode 2. What I call the step into the new world, right? In the sense of, here's the new reality that the characters are going to be facing. This is what the show is going to be like going forward, right? So that at the end of your pilot, the audience has a really solid idea of what your show is about. They're not wondering what your show is about. They know what your show is about, so they can come back and want to watch it. So there's going to be a temporary resolution, kind of a step towards, you know, success. A lot of times there's immediately a confrontation. The B and C stories may come to a stopping point, but with a hint of, but there's more to come. You could tie up your loose ends, various loose ends, with something that feels like a little bit of an epilogue. You could end with a big final reveal that would be opening up. It would almost be the beginning of the inciting incident of episode 2. You're going to follow that with the inciting incident of episode 2. It could end with a very active sequence, especially if your show has a lot of those. So this is what happens in The Expanse, is that you have that really big active sequence. You will see that the show has already been launched at that point. You can show the characters in their changed world, launching their new journey. This is what happens in Mrs. Maisel, is that she begins to become a stand-up comedian. The ending has to be part of the week to week of the show. It really has to be part of your show, though. It can't just be like a shocking thing that isn't really part of your show, that's almost like tonally sticks out. It has to be consistent with the rest of your show in tone and theme. But at this point, we should get a sense that there's a dramatic change from the opening, that the characters can't go back to the way things were. We can't just reset. If at the end of your pilot, there's a feeling of, you know what, we could just go back to the start because nothing much has changed, you have a problem. You will see that in all of these pilots, there is no going back. There is no reset button. We can't pretend that this didn't happen. And that they all leave the audience with kind of this hanging question of, okay, but how, why, what will the characters do now? So it does leave us on a question, though it's not necessarily a cliffhanger. It's really a beginning of a new reality. That's what you want in your Act 5. You will see in all of my story maps that there's really like not new information revealed in Act 5 necessarily. It's just, there's nothing that we didn't suspect or really know about already. All of the major storylines have already been launched, and it's not like this is now the thing that opens up the series. If you think about it, you have this big cliffhanger of Logan having a stroke at the end of Succession, but that's not what's opening the series, right? The confrontations between the characters have already happened. Their, win or loss has, Kendall's win and Logan's loss has already happened in Act 4. That launch has already begun. So I want to go on to one of the things that I think is maybe the most important, because that's it, that's your pilot, is this idea of conflicts, decisions, and consequences of your characters driving the story. We talk about, like, sometimes writers say, I have a very character-driven show. All shows are character-driven. We talked about that, right? That it's all about character, and that the characters have to drive the story. So how are your characters going to drive the story? Through conflicts, which lead to decisions, which have stakes, and then have outcomes. There's a so what, a consequence. So a conflict is a crisis, right? And it's motivated by the character's goals and motivations. We wouldn't be in this crisis if the character wasn't pursuing the goal to begin with, because they have a motivation. And in that conflict, we have a change of power. You have a win or a loss. The character in that moment either wins that particular confrontation or loses that particular confrontation. And as a result of that, or in that process, they have to make a decision to take an action or to not take an action. Walking away is also a decision. This can be a physical action, or it can be expressed in dialogue, right? It can be something that they're thinking about or deciding in terms of in their head that they're expressing in dialogue. But we have to understand the stakes to their decision of, so what? What do they stand to gain or lose as a result of that decision? And again, some sense of time pressure that whether it's an actual ticking clock or just a sense from their own motivation that they don't have forever to achieve that goal. And each scene having a higher stakes than the last, that the stakes are continually rising, not just resetting problem solving and solving themselves one after the other. And then each conflict and decision has to have an outcome. So what? There has to be a consequence. And that will get you to the next scene within that storyline. So what? Well, and so therefore the next thing happens. And the character keeps changing, right? Evolving through all of these events. So you have this and so construction. If you outline your pilot and each beat starts with an and then this happens, you have an and then construction, that's not what you want. Then events are following each other, but they're not causing each other. And you want a causal relationship where each thing leads to the next thing so that the characters are driving the story. It's moving forward. It has momentum. And the only way to do that is with the structure of and so. There's a win or a loss, and if there's a win, and so the character continues their plan. If they lose, and so they decide to change, right? If they win, and so they have made progress towards their goal and they can take the next step. So you have this sense that each scene leads to the next, to the next, to the next, by causing the next thing to happen. In any scene, if you ask, why is this happening right now? The answer should eventually go back to the character's needs, wants, motivations, to their personality. Why is this happening? Well, because something happened before this. And why did that happen? Because something happened before that. And why did that happen? Well, because the character is the kind of person who, or because the character is pursuing a goal because they want to achieve such and such, right? It's going back to the character. That's what we mean that the character is driving the story. So it's not, if you ask yourself, why is this happening? It can't be because you, the writer, need this to happen in order to set up something for the future, or it needs to happen in order to have some kind of visual, for example. It's not I, the writer, need it because I need to convey some information. It's because something happened before that and before that, and ultimately it's about the character. Whenever you have coincidences or a contrivance where you've created a situation that's, that you have crafted and doesn't go back to the character, you can feel it. It's contrived action. I know that in real life there are coincidences. If you have a coincidence in your pilot, either the characters have to at least acknowledge that it's a small world after all, at a minimum, but better yet, it shouldn't really be a coincidence, right? There's a reason both characters are here at this moment, because they share something. They have a shared goal or a shared personality trait. So of course they would be in this situation at the same time, right? Or literally this is a small place and the chances of you running into someone are pretty darn good, right? But there needs to be the sense that it's not just completely contrived or coincidental, but each beat is causing the next one to happen. And the relationships are developing scene to scene, that the relationships are important and they're intentional. You don't want relationships that are just sort of incidental, where it's not really a relationship that's contributing to the story of your pilot. Because again, since it's flowing out of character, it's flowing out of the relationships between the characters. Try to make each crisis somehow physical through what the characters actually do, as well as an emotional crisis that they're going through inside. So that there's some emotion behind everything that they do, because we connect with the characters emotionally. You could also think of it this way. If I can take a scene out of your pilot and it's not going to change the scenes before, or especially the scenes after it, then something is wrong with your structure. I shouldn't be able to cut a scene. I should have, if your pilot is long and I'm trying to cut a scene, I should be having a really rough time. I should be telling you that I really, I feel like I want to cut something, but I understand that if I cut this beat, then after it, like, stuff won't make sense, and I'm pulling a thread and it's unraveling everything you've written, and that's a problem. Like, we're going to have to now adjust everything after this because this has been taken out. If you can just remove something, then it's an extra piece that you don't need, because you see that when you're stacking things up on each other, when everything is a consequence of the last thing, then you can't take something out or everything will fall apart, right? This is a really good litmus test of, do I have that and so construction, or are the scenes separate from each other completely and I could take any one of them out, or can I rearrange the order of them and it wouldn't matter, because then you don't have the rising stakes and you also don't have causality if they can be in any order, if they're like separate blocks rather than stacked. So the other thing that I want to talk about is types of plot points that you might have. That you can kind of pick from. A frequent type of plot point is a reversal, where you have a situation and it changes to its opposite. You see these a lot. There are also plot points where the characters discover something or recognize something, where they gain some knowledge, where they reveal their emotions or their attitudes, which result in a change in their relationships. You also have, so think about where do your characters discover or recognize something? Suspense and surprise, and we'll talk about this in a second, where you have this kind of suspense of gradual inevitability, or the surprise of a sudden fall. If you surprise the audience with a startling incident, then they will feel suspense, wanting to know what happens next. An epiphany, a discovery or recognition, is the characters making a discovery or recognizing something. An epiphany is a realization for the audience, not for the characters, but where we see a meaningful moment and are startled or suddenly realize something that is, that is really logical within, that makes perfect sense within the context, but it's only now that it's dawning on us of, oh, I see now how this works. Think about the fact that the audience is very prepared to accept the familiar, but when you have unexpected moments, those are really refreshing. So you can see that a lot of these are about creating plot points that are unexpected, where the audience isn't getting what they thought they were going to get because something is reversing, or because the characters discover something, or because there's a surprise, or we realize something. And then I'm sure you've all heard about plants and payoffs, and a lot of plot points are either plants, meaning something that happens that will have distant consequences. Maybe it has immediate consequences to the next beat as well, but sometimes a plant doesn't seem to have an immediate consequence. It's something that happens or something that we see that will have a later consequence. And that later consequence is the payoff. And you will see that a lot of pilots have lots and lots of plants in the first half. You don't want too many where it's like random information for the audience to file away. We're not particularly good at remembering random things 20 minutes later, actually. You can run that experiment on your friends, like, I don't know, give them 10 random scenarios and see how many of them they can, out of context, remember 20 minutes later. You'll be surprised, not that many. But if we understand what's going on, then even though there are a lot of plants, we understand each of them, so we can kind of follow them one after the other. And then there's a series of payoffs in the second half of your pilot. So this is like all of Lupin, right? There's a series of things planted at the beginning, things that you're going to need to know for later, or things that are going to be revealed later, and then an entire series of epiphanies, of payoffs in the fourth act of that pilot. It plays a lot with that, but all of these pilots have those plants and payoffs. Another thing that is difficult, I think, to do is to get the right pacing for your pilot. You don't want a pacing that is really monotonous. It will make your pilot feel monotonous. You want rises and falls in emotion and action and tone to some extent. Try to alternate plot-heavy scenes that have visual movement and rising stakes with some more character moments that have dialogue, and where it's really the characters that are progressing forward more so than the plot. Try to have a mix of both. Avoid really long scenes with little movement, especially characters talking within four walls. It's just not visual. This is ultimately a visual medium, so think about how it's going to look. Try to have longer talking scenes in interesting places or with some kind of movement. These are like your walk and talk scenes where characters are walking through a world and showing things, so that there is interesting camera work and visuals that can happen, not just back and forth dialogue, not just talking heads. So you want to, but you also, by the way, want to like avoid having just a series of 1/3 page or 1/2 page scenes that will make your pilot feel very choppy. One of the things I didn't put in here is, especially as you're intercutting, if you're intercutting between two sort of different worlds, keep in mind that the audience, especially in the first half of your pilot, needs a moment to kind of adjust and be like, okay, where am I? When am I? What's going on? So you can't have tiny little scenes back to back. It will make it feel very choppy. By the time the audience realizes where they are, we've moved on, and that's not going to work. You can see how almost lyrical the construction is in Lupin, where we're moving between two radically different worlds, right? The present and the past. Each time the audience is given a chance to kind of get their bearings at the beginning of the scene. We don't move on too quickly. At the same time, you want to, what we call, step out the beats of the story so that you track each subplot all the way through. So it's, you don't want to have a situation where the A story goes all the way through, but then Act 2 has a B story, and then Act 3 has the C story, right? Where you want to track the B story all the way through and track potentially a C story all the way through. In through various acts. Now, sometimes the storyline won't come in until Act 2 or even Act 3, and then it's only tracked for the rest, right? Or sometimes a new storyline will naturally come in as a consequence later on. It couldn't, you know, and supplant an earlier storyline or add on. So the police investigation storyline in Lupin obviously can't go through all the different acts because the police can't start investigating until after the crime occurs. That makes logical sense, right? So that subplot is going to have to get added on at the end. But otherwise, you really want to try to follow each of the storylines all the way through your pilot. And keep in mind that time moves forward in each plot line, right, kind of evenly. So you can't really put like later in your script. That's what intercutting is for, is to pass time and communicate to your audience that it is later. So you know, a lot of times writers have a hard time with these two people are having dinner, so they sit down, they, you know, order, and they have an argument, and then they like leave, you know, and so they've now had, and all this took about 3 pages, which means that they had a 3-minute dinner. Wait a minute, that's not working, right? We can't do that. And we can't put in the middle of it like a jump cut where they're sitting there talking and then we jump and they're still sitting there talking, right? But now it's an hour later. So how are we supposed to solve that? Well, intercut, cut to a different plot line. This is why you have more than one storyline, right? So that you can cut away and cut back. And when you cut back, time has passed. This is a really difficult thing to keep all the balls in the air. So this is something that, you know, I, working with writers, really struggle with, of how can we intercut so that this pacing works, so that everything kind of seems to move forward in a good way. You sometimes have to really play with your pilot. How can we make it all work? Let's talk about mystery and suspense and anticipation, which is such a big part of so many pilots. The truth is that the audience really thrives on knowing more than the characters do rather than less. Notice that in period shows, history shows, there's sort of this delicious feeling of knowing how it ends, or, well, you could always look it up on Wikipedia. If knowing how it ends were a real problem, then you couldn't have any history shows, because you would just look up, you know, then The Crown would be an utter failure because we all know how it ends. But it's not, because knowing how it ends is actually giving you a real sense of satisfaction when you watch it unfold. So wanting to create a sense of mystery by putting like very little on the page is only going to cause confusion or frustration for the audience. We can't go through lots and lots of scenes that we don't understand, that are meaningless, because eventually we just lose interest. It's sort of like, well, I'm not involved as the audience member, so I guess I'm moving on. I'm not going to wait until the end of the pilot to find out what's been happening and then like rewind and watch it again, right? Because I have 500 shows to pick from, so I'm not interested in a situation where your pilot only makes sense if I watch it twice or read it twice, right? I need to follow the first time through in order to invest in your characters and in your story. Your characters give the best script notes. They're great. This is writers giving script notes to themselves. If your characters say, I'm confused, the audience is confused too. If your character says, I'm bored, or this is boring, the audience is guaranteed to be bored. If they weren't before, they're now realizing that they should be. So look at what your characters are thinking about how your pilot is doing so far. And you will see, and sometimes actually, I love that moment in Mrs. Maisel, where Midge says that Joel has made the routine worse by slowing it down. And it's kind of almost a sly commentary on what makes the whole pilot and really the show work, is that super fast pace, that's what makes the comedy work, is fast, 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 right? The characters are commenting, in this case, giving you, why is this working? Why is this so good? So when the characters know more than the audience does momentarily, that can work great because then there's a sense of mystery and a sense of suspense where they know something you don't, but you want to catch up really quickly so that you're not lost for too long. And when the audience knows more than the characters do, then there's a sense of anticipation and excitement. So that's not necessarily boring. The audience knows considerably more than the characters do in The Expanse, all the way through. We are privy to information from both sides, while the two sides are not privy to information about each other. But it works. You can't look at the pilot and say, oh, there's no excitement in this or no anticipation. There's tons. And there is a mystery in there. And even though we have a much better idea of the solution to the mystery than the characters, that actually creates more anticipation rather than less mystery, if that makes sense. I want to give a note also about devices because writers are very fond of these. Devices, narrative devices are basically anything that isn't just the natural progression of the show, I guess, the actual present day, normal forward momentum of the show. They are flashbacks, dreams, voiceover, narration, super or chyron, which are typed words on screen, montages or series of shots, which you can look up, they're not the same thing. All those things that are essentially narrative devices to tell the story, not just in a linear flowing fashion. If you're going to use these, you need to use them consistently multiple times to tell the story, not as a writing aid, right? Not because, oh, I can't think of a better way to write this. It works well when it's a feature of your show rather than like an outlier, a bug, right? As in software terms. Here's the thing, television is a deeply intimate medium. We consume television most of the time in the privacy of our own home. I look at my son who watches shows on his laptop or on his phone in bed. What could possibly be more intimate than that space? The world of your show exists for your audience. If it's really good, then it's as if it's real. Think about how much you feel that way about shows, that it's as if this is actually in existence, as if it were another reality that we can step into. Whenever you use one of these devices, you're piercing that illusion of that bubble by revealing essentially that we're watching the show, right? Like breaking that fourth wall. So that's inherently, if there's a better way to tell the story without that, then do that. There can be good reasons to use these devices, obviously, because lots of pilots do that are very successful, but they're not using it because the writers couldn't think of a better way to tell the story. They're using it for good reason, for a purpose, intentionally. They're using it for dramatic purpose. They're using it for a tonal kind of purpose, which, by the way, a lot of times the supers type words on screen can actually contribute to the tone of the show, or they're using it for thematic reasons. But think about, like, what's the point of this? Why are we using these devices? And don't necessarily default to them. Think of them as a way to add rather than this is my only way to tell the story. And then the last thing is talking about dense writing. One of the things that you can see is just how dense these pilots are. Every scene serves more than one purpose. Scenes move the plot forward, they develop character, and they build the world. And some do all three, but at least two. They take advantage of TV being a visual medium. They are beautiful in some sense, in their own way. They show things rather than just tell about things whenever possible, which means the characters find out important information on screen and make decisions on screen. We're not told about their decision or about important information. We watch it happen. Don't think about you having a reader. There's no such person as the reader. We're all viewers. I'm a viewer when I am reading. Chris at Netflix is a viewer when he's reading. We put ourselves in the point of view of the audience. What will it be like to watch this? So only write on the page what the audience will see. You can't communicate to some other person and put things that the audience wouldn't see. If you have voiceover or narration, have it add to the story rather than repeating what we see, because already what we see is, that's your visual medium. And think about what the business, the little things that people do while they are talking, that too is a visual that we can see that tells us a lot about what the character is thinking or feeling, how they are doing the little things that they're doing while they're talking. Make every word count. What are we getting out of each scene? What new information are we gaining that we need in order to understand things? What action is taking place? What decision is being made or indecision that we need for subsequent scenes? Why is this scene needed? The idea is that you can't get up and get a glass of water without missing something. In all of these pilots, that's kind of one of the common threads. You can't look away. If you miss one moment, you're going to be in trouble because you won't be able to understand the rest. My son likes to watch TV while eating dinner. I couldn't watch any episodes of Lupin while eating dinner, because if I look down at my fork, all is lost. I will not be able to follow this anymore, because every single line, every visual, every moment is too important. I can't look away, so I can't be doing something else. And that feeling of I am glued to this. This is the most important thing I'm doing right now. Is watching this is what makes every single one of these pilots great, and what makes you want to come back and watch that show, which is ultimately your goal, is to get the audience to that place where they're completely immersed and have to keep watching at the end of your pilot. And I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's a very high positive note to leave it on. So Amanda, I will turn this over to you now and try to maybe, I don't know, I can actually leave it up on this, or you may have to take over the screen share. Sorry, because again, my controls are like buried underneath things.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that as well. Sorry, guys. Give me a second so we can fix that. All right. All right, there we go. So we are all set. Excellent. I love the way that you ended that with your son, eating his dinner and being able to look away from the screen, because again, like Lupin is just, there's so much complexity, not just in the dialogue, but just the way that they filmed it. I mean, it's really just an incredible show. All right, so okay, everybody. So this was awesome, Anna. Thank you so very much. I mean, talk about like, and I don't know if you're looking at the chat. If you give me a favor, it's like it's going in rapid fire. Wow, thank you so much. Fantastic info. This was amazing. This is too cool, you guys. Thank you for typing this in. We're Anna and I are able to see this, as well as the team here at Stage 32. So thank you so much. This is great. So perfect. So you guys, for those of you who are joining late, there are a lot of facts that get frequently asked questions that are coming in terms of, are you going to be able to watch this afterwards? And, are you going to be able to watch this afterwards? Are you going to have access to everything? So I'm going to put a link here in the lounge for everybody, once again, that I've created a facts section that has all of this information. And actually, Kristen, while you're in here, do you mind sticking that in the chat box for everybody? I actually just lost that screen. So if you don't mind, that would be amazing. And then guys, we are going to now open it up for Q&A. This was an incredible deep dive into story structure. The one thing I love about the way that Anna teaches is that she thinks about the series. It's not just the pilot. She thinks about how that pilot kicks into series. And that's what's so important for us with this Stage 32 and Netflix content creation series, because we want to be thinking longer term. We want to be thinking outside of just that pilot script, because there is so much more than just the pilot script. So hope you guys found this very helpful. And now we're going to get to some of your questions. All right, Anna, are you ready? Do you need to take a sip of water before we start?
While you read questions, I'm drinking one.
Okay, perfect. I love this question. So I saw this come in while you were teaching, and you and I actually had talked about something similar. This is from Eli, and Eli said, does it happen more often than not when the script may change before or after a table read versus the standard writer's room process, and then what makes it on the screen?
It always changes. It's not a more common than not. It's an inevitability. That's the default. I've never seen a script that didn't change from development all the way, and you get rounds and rounds of notes from producer, studio, your cast. If you're adapting something, then potentially the person who wrote the novel, your director. I mean, this is a collaborative effort with really hundreds of people coming together, not to mention, of course, the network executives and all that. And it's just an evolution of the script, all the way to and including changes you make on set as you're shooting, not to mention the editing room, right? So there's no way that the script and what's on screen are going to be the same thing. That's impossible. Depending on what stage the script that you get was produced at, like what draft you're getting, it may be very different from what you see on screen. My breakdowns are of the pilots as they aired, right? Of what you actually see on screen, the final product, because we have to settle on something, and that's an unchangeable fact, right? As opposed to otherwise, we could take any draft of the script and come up with a different breakdown. One of the things I point out in my breakdowns is where things have changed. The Expanse changed quite significantly from the script that you might read to what actually aired. And you know, it's interesting to think about some of those changes. Do you agree with them? Do you not agree with them? Some of the changes are fundamental structural changes, actually. So both structures would work, but it's a kind of a storytelling choice. So that's basically inevitable.
All right, awesome. And I think it was, I forgot which, so of the scripts that we did, the story map, there was one that changed pretty significantly.
The Expanse changed very significantly. That one is really, really significant. The two story, for one thing, Act 1 takes one storyline and then switches to the other storyline, right? So there's Miller and on series, and then there's Canterbury, and the script switches them. The as aired pilot starts with Miller and goes to the Canterbury, and the script swaps that. They go to the Canterbury first and then to Miller. And it's one of the good questions is, would you agree with this decision? So I do, for a host of complicated storytelling reasons that I won't go into, but it's a valid choice to do it the other way.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm seeing a ton of questions, and I would just want to kind of get this out of the way. A lot of you guys are asking, how can you get your script to Netflix? I put this in the FAQ, the frequently asked questions on the webinar page. So if you look at the link that I gave you, our CEO, RB, did a phenomenal job explaining the process of how to get something to Netflix. So if you click on that link, look under the FAQ, you'll find the link to watch that video from RB. And then the other thing too is I'm going to put RB's Instagram and Twitter handle in the chat. It's at RB Walks Into a Bar, and he gives a ton of great information on his social media for advice. So make sure you watch that, because we're not going to be answering that question in this webinar, but you can access that in the FAQ. All right, and I love this question too, Anna. This one came in from Peter, and Peter said, what's the best way to convey your writer's voice in your pilot?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. Actually, I feel like the thing is that your pilot should be conveying your characters' voices, right? And your characters shouldn't all sound the same, because real people don't sound the same. So, but your voice is going to come through almost as like the cohesiveness, as the aggregate of that, if that makes any sense. Thematically, through pacing, through the tone of the show. I feel like that's where like tone and theme come in a lot. is that that's and the kinds of characters you pick, that really gives it your unique spin, your unique voice. It's a little bit misleading because you don't want your characters to sound like you. It's not a literal voice. It's more a point of view on the world, which is where your themes and your tone both have figurative point of view and then also a literal view. I feel like that's where you get a lot of that, a lot of that idea of like your voice, your take on things. I hope that makes some sense.
No, that definitely made sense. I do have an interesting question, but I actually don't know. Have you seen Ozark, Anna?
Yes.
Okay, so you probably can. This I think is a really insightful question, and this is from Daniel. And Daniel said, the Ozark pilot script is really odd, and I feel like it departs quite a lot from the structure as Anna presents, from most of it being told from only one character's point of view to a longer act one, and in even a setting that will not be revisited in the show. Have you had a chance to look at that pilot, and how do you feel about shows that seem to defy conventions?
Well, it doesn't defy the convention of this structure, so much so that I love teaching from the Ozark pilot. It's virtually a textbook pilot when you watch it. It's one of the things that I use in my labs as an example because it actually has perfect pilot structure, like to a T. The setting may be different, but the world isn't. The world of these characters and how they view their world is not really different. And actually, I don't know that I remember the script right now specifically, but when you look at the show as aired, it really follows the structure to a T. Again, things tend to evolve as they go, and it kind of depends on what draft of the script you might be looking at. It does draw you into one character's point of view, a lead character's point of view, which is great because you're in this person's head, and you need to be, because you need to relate to a person who, when you think about it, is not really likable, right? But you do get into the points of view of some of the other characters as well. You do relate to them. Without them, the show wouldn't flesh out, right? You do have some of those other storylines that are moving forward, certainly to, his wife's character, and you get into a lot of other points of view. So I don't know, in terms of just the story structure, if you map that pilot, which I've done, it actually maps onto the structure perfectly. It has one of the best illustrations of that midpoint, and then also especially the recovery from the midpoint, that moment where they literally take stock of the situation, where they sit and say, so what are we going to do now, given what's happened? And has like a great launch as well, where there's this moment of like, we think we've got it all figured out, and then Dale says, yeah, not so fast, things are not going to be as easy as you thought. It has a lot of those, it has great illustrations of some of these points.
All right. Next question I have here. So one of the things, Anna, is we have an enormous international audience tuning into today. And as we're seeing from, a lot of the shows that are coming up on Netflix, like the success of Lupin and Squid Game and Sabura, all of these films coming from Korea, Italy, France, literally from all over the world, Narcos, with the international community, Guillermo has a really great question. And a lot of these countries are used to a lot of regional programming that are country funded and go through like traditional financing schemes through the country for their local language outlets. So what's really exciting with the streamers is that it allows these countries to be able to showcase their stories on a global scale. So Guillermo has a really great question when he says, when you're going in to write a new television pilot, how do you choose a topic, and how do you select which story to tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. Write what you are passionate about, what excites you first of all. If you are not passionate about your story, no one else ever will be. So write something that's personal to you. It doesn't need to be your own life story, although lots of people do that, but a story that you don't mind spending the next many years of your life working on. If you sell the show, you're going to be spending every waking and most sleeping moments on this. So write something that you want to live in long term. So that's one criteria. And then also kind of turn that around of write something that people are going to care about and want to watch. What's even in your own country, right? What's in the zeitgeist? What is in social media? What do you talk about? What do people talk about in their daily lives? Not just, it takes a long time though for a concept to make it on the screen. So not necessarily what's happening today at this moment, but what are some of the big ideas and timeless themes that are playing out in our lives today, that are playing out in the world around you? How is your world that you see or that you can research very specific, a very kind of very specific slice of the world that you are seeing, but then how is that relevant to everyone else? Because that's what's going to make your show feel at the same time very much you and regional and this peek into another world that we haven't seen, and yet at the same time something that I can be pulled into and immediately live in and feel comfortable in. It's, so it's both your own passion and then what are people caring about around you.
I think that's a great answer. And I hope you don't mind, I'll take it a step further. We say often here at Stage 32 that all of us around the world have universal themes, centering around a universal theme. We all feel love, we all feel anger, we all feel betrayal. Some of us feel, the expectations to live up to a parent. There's all of those things that happen, to all of us around the world that are universal themes. So if you can create that as part of the show and then set that into your part of the world that makes it unique, that's truly what makes your local story inspiring for the global audience. And I think I recently watched Suburra, which was based out of Italy, and I feel like they did a tremendous job, really like focusing on elements of betrayal, friendship, exploring sexuality, family, loyalty, and it was all wrapped around the world of the Vatican and the mob and the gypsies. And it was a world that, from the States, I don't have access to see that. And so that's a great example of, showing what's really special about your country, your region, and then pulling in those themes that I can relate to, which is, like the love and the betrayal and the loyalty. So hope that's helpful for everybody. And the fact of the matter, Netflix and other streamers are looking for that content right now. They're looking for those stories right now. So we want you guys to be writing them. So please, we hope that this webinar will help you, to encourage you to understand when you sit down to write, to think big like that. All right, Anna, let's move to this next one. And I also love this question. You guys, there's thousands of questions in here, so we can't get to everything. So I'm trying to pick out some things that I think will be very helpful. Susan asked, is there a structure for broadcast, or is the structure for broadcast the same as for streaming? So like network versus streaming. And if not, what are the differences? Because I know you've had some network experience as well.
The structure is the same. It may be a little bit more evident actually on broadcast shows. So broadcast shows are faster. They eat through more story. It's kind of the way we phrase that they go through just sort of a lot more story in a shorter period of time, where we say that streamers are especially like slow burn. So that's one difference. But I actually feel like the biggest difference between the two is heavy emphasis on the word broad. That's why it's broadcast, as in We want to reach a really big audience, a really diverse audience with the show, that there's something in there that is relatable to everyone, regardless of background or religion or socioeconomic status or or even age, sometimes. So as broad of an audience as we can capture, versus, a place like Netflix, where there is more of an emphasis on, we can have something that's really niche, that's really appealing to a slice of the audience. Not to say we don't want it to appeal to everyone, because of course we do, and many shows do, but there is this sense of, we have something for everyone, and it doesn't need to be there isn't that requirement of it needs to be for everybody. So it's not even like about explicit content, although obviously there's that and standards, but it's more about how much, like how big a net are we casting, which really then impacts how specific the storylines can be, or how specific the content can be, if that makes any sense. Structurally, it's really the same. It's really about pacing, and it's really about the audience. That's and to some extent also because broadcast is really being produced on a week to week basis. In the US, there's more of an opportunity to be really topical, to address like a headline of the week, so to speak, which a lot of episodic shows do, that you really couldn't necessarily do, in like a longer lead kind of show for a streamer, for example.
All right, you guys, a lot of you are asking for Anna's contact information. That's why we've created the Stage 32 community. So all you have to do is create a profile. Just go to stage32.com and create a profile. It's free, takes 30 seconds. And then you can find Anna just by clicking the browse section and then typing in her name, and you can send her a networking request, and she is always available on Stage 32. All right, so I actually lost the person's question. I believe the person's name was Alexandra, so I'm going to try and paraphrase what Alexandra said. She said that if you have an ensemble cast and you're writing your pilot, setting it up for the series, do you include all of your ensemble characters in the pilot? And what are your recommendations to that?
Probably not. It depends on how big an ensemble you have. And to some extent, if you think about it, all shows are an ensemble cast on some level, right? Because of course you have to have supporting characters. So it's not like there's only going to be one character in your whole show. Probably not. Like I said, you're going to add, you're going to include your core cast, if that makes any sense. Your most key characters, and then you're very likely going to add in episode 2 and quite likely to add in episode 3 as well. You're going to build the world out further and further and further. I mean, Succession is a great example of this, but you can take a look. I mean, Game of Thrones is a great example, right? We're not going to introduce all, the entirety of the world in the pilot. That'd be crazy. Nor are we going to introduce every main character in the pilot, because that too would be crazy. It's too big a show. We can't fit all that in. We want to introduce the main characters that we're really going to laser focus on for the first season. And we're going to start with sort of almost an example of the world, or, some of the key elements of the world. And then we're going to build out, up from there. So don't feel like every single person in your show has to be introduced in the pilot, but you have to have some key characters that we can really hook into.
All right, excellent. And a lot of people are asking if you offer classes as well. Yes, Anna is one of our valued Stage 32 educators. She has webinars on Stage 32, and she does offer private intensive labs through Stage 32. So that education link that I gave to you guys earlier, just keep checking that. And then when Anna is available, she is available to work with you on the labs, or you can take her webinars. And again, I'm sorry, I lost this person's comment. There's just so many comments coming in. So I'm going to do my best to paraphrase it. So the person that wrote in is from Nigeria, and he wrote a pilot that people are saying is a very well-written pilot, but it's centered in Lagos, Nigeria. And people are telling him that he should change it to be based in America. And so he wanted to get your thoughts on how does he keep that story based in Nigeria, but then make that appealing to a global audience. Kind of what we touched on before a little bit, but just wanted to kind of dive in maybe with this specific example for the country.
I always hesitate to give this answer because who am I? But I don't know who's telling you to do that, but I categorically disagree with them. And sometimes you just have to stick to your vision, to be honest with you, your vision of your show, and maybe talk to some other people and see if this is a consensus or not, which I think is actually a really good idea, even when people are giving you script notes that make you pause and think, well, I don't know that this is consistent with my vision. Is kind of, like talk to some other people and see what they think. I very seriously doubt that this is the note that Netflix would give you, for example, given their goals. You want your pilot to be your view and your world. So I think that will create a lot of problems for you, not least that if you are not from the US, living in the US, it's going to be a heavy lifting thing for you to do enough research for things to feel authentic, right? Whereas you have an authentic pilot now about a world that is, that a great deal about. So I guess I don't know if this is a good answer or not, but my answer would be do some more, ask for some more feedback about, or maybe ask what about this world is not connecting. I actually think that may be the better question of why did you feel disconnected? Is the world set up not clear? Is there not enough of exposition that kind of lets the audience into this world? Is it just confusing? The rules of your universe are confusing. What exactly is it that's not connecting to your audience? Because I think it's not about resetting it, it's about making the setting feel universal.
All right, great. I'm just going to get to a couple more questions, you guys, and again, please hang tight because I'm giving you guys something really cool at the end with open writing assignments and actually something really cool coming up today. So 2 more questions. This one here is from Melissa, and I love this. She says, one piece of advice that I hear all the time is to avoid heavy amounts of dialogue and exposition. Yet a lot of shows that I like best tend to have a whole bunch of witty dialogues, such as The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. So how can a writer walk that fine tightrope of being dialogue heavy without compromising the show's pacing?
My first instinct is to kind of give you two answers to that question, or there are 2 things. One is those arguments, so that people are not just talking to each other, but they are fighting with each other. One of the most dialogue heavy sequences of Mrs. Maisel is the sequence where Joel is leaving, right? And it's all just back and forth, but it's fast because they're fighting, there's conflict. So that's one thing. There's a big difference between talking and arguing. And then the second thing is visuals, is having people have those conversations in, against cool visuals, against things we see, and taking advantage of that, of that visual medium. And seeing characters walk through their world and show you their world while they're talking about it at the same time. And that can really, it's almost like there's this big exposition thing at the beginning of The Expanse where it's like an explanation of the world. Again, they have to do a lot of exposition. It works because it's under the coolest visual sequence that flies through this whole world and shows every aspect of it. You're too distracted by how visually cool it is to notice that it's just about a bunch of downloaded information.
Awesome. All right, and this is a question from Vinka, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase some of the things that I'm seeing coming in through here. And again, this speaks to the big international audience that we have. You know, a lot of people communicate on a global scale through English, but that may not be their first language. So Vinka has a question and says, do you recommend writing the dialogue in pure English or in the accent the characters speak, as is the case with the accent and dialect that is a big part of the characters? So that might be, you know, something for where the person's region is. You know, do they convert that text into pure English, or should they keep that flair of their local language?
Oh, I think you should definitely keep the voices of your characters authentic. It's really important that we understand what they're saying, because obviously if we don't understand, then everything falls apart. But as much as you can keep their own dialect is better, as much as you can keep their own voices, and certainly don't make them sound generic. That's much better. You can get really clever, and this is tough sometimes, but you can use like phrases that are very specific to that language, or I don't want to say terminology, but you know, and then subtly explain in the dialogue, especially through, you know, through arguments, of like, what is that supposed to mean? You know, those kinds of moments, so that you can actually give some phrasing and some dialogue to your audience, so that they learn a little bit about who your character is and learn a little bit about what they say. It can be a very clever way to do that, rather than like subtitles, although there are lots of shows now that that subtitle certain scenes, right, that bring you know, an international show to an English speaking audience, where some of the characters speak English, but others do not. And that there's some of that as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. Keep your characters as authentic as possible and give them different voices, diverse voices that are all their own.
I love that. All right, Anna. So I am going to finish us up there. I think that was a great way to end it. So you guys, if you want to type in some feedback here for Anna, feel free to start typing that into the chat. Any last, you know, Anna, one thing that we love here at Stage 32 is being positive and encouraging. Can you give one piece of advice for everybody that's in this room right now? You know, we all know how difficult it is to be a creative, and there's a lot of no's, and you know, there's a lot of hills to climb. Can you give a piece of advice to everybody to keep them motivated and keep them positive on their creative journey?
Yeah, I mean, what I always think about, and I find kind of poignant and cool, is that there's this very interesting you know, contrast or dichotomy about television. Hundreds of people are involved in making a show come to life. It's a grand human project when you think about it. You watch a show and it's, you know, all these people devoted years of their lives to make this a reality. But every single show you've ever seen starts with a writer with a laptop, you know, somewhere in a room thinking of an idea and starting to write it. That's how they all began. You're in good company. You're in the company of every single person who has ever written any of those great shows. It all begins on the page. That's where they start. And that's, you know, that's where the journey begins. So without you sitting there and writing, there is no show, and we would just not have television at all. It's the fundamental of where it begins. So keep writing. Otherwise, the rest of us are out of a job.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for today, Anna. This has been incredible. And as you can see from the pouring out of support, you know, this has been fantastic. You guys, the lounge link that I just put all of the links in the chat box of everything that I gave out today. head over to the lounge link. Anna is very active on Stage 32, so she'll be able to see your questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, whatever. Stick it in that lounge topic, and we will be able to stay in touch after we log off today. So that is first and foremost. And then also, you guys, after we're done, you're going to see a survey pop up at the end of this. We love to learn from you to understand, is this what you expected? What it was that, what did you get out of this webinar? So please just take 2 minutes to fill that out for us. It really helps us and helps me program our education and get better from time to time. One other question that I keep seeing coming up is when are the next Netflix and Stage 32 webcasts? We're going to be doing one webcast a month for the next 5 months, or actually now at this point, next 4 months. So be sure to check the Stage 32 education page. I stuck that link in the chat box, and you'll be able to see when we announce the new webcasts, so you can sign up for those. All of those are free. They are free to watch. They are free to watch on demand. You can watch them as many times as you'd like. You just have to have a Stage 32 profile to be able to view them. And I think that's it.
Amanda?
Yeah.
I will say one other thing, which is that I'm watching the chat and there were so many questions we didn't get to because we could be here all day. But a lot of them are very specific writing questions, which I love. Please find me on Stage 32. I promise I actually exist. And ask those questions and I will answer them. I may not answer them within 5 minutes, but because I'm doing a bunch of other things too, but I promise you I will come back and I'll give you the best answer I can think of. So don't lose those questions and please ask, especially in that lounge, so other people can see the answers as well, so that we can try to get to, I can try to get to as many of these wonderful questions as we can that we didn't get to today.
Yeah, that's great. And again, I just stuck the lounge post in the chat. You guys, it'd be great if you guys put your questions there, so then that way everyone here that's in the room can see Anna respond, and Anna can give the advice that can help. The goal is for us to be able to share the same type of information with each other. So definitely use that link. All right, so before I let you guys go, I promised you something really cool and exciting. So for those of you who are new to Stage 32, you may not be familiar with the Stage 32 Writers Room. And for those of you who don't know what the Stage 32 Writers Room, it is a private community that we have within the Stage 32 community that is led by our Director of Script Services, Jason Murch. And Jason has put together a group of writers that meet every week online through Stage 32. And what we do is we bring in development executives, managers, agents, producers that you can work with to ask questions about your craft, about your career. He sets you up with writing challenges every month to keep you accountable, because we know writers tend to procrastinate and not write, so we keep you accountable. We also offer practice pitching sessions. So if you're getting ready to go out and pitch a project, we meet every week to go over pitching with one another. We go over different script reads, and you have a private lounge with the community so you can stay in touch with each other. And it really is the most supportive professional development writing community in bar none. So because you took the webinar today with Anna, I'm going to be putting a link here in the chat box, and we are actually going to give everybody a free month that joined today of the Stage 32 Writers Room. So I stuck the link in the chat box. It's stage32.com/plan-VIP. So if you want to join here and log in today, that'd be great. And one of the really cool things about the Stage 32 Writers Room is that you have access to open writing assignments from some of the top production companies and mini studios in the industry. And this is exclusive for our Stage 32 Writers Room members. So you can only apply for the open writing assignments if you are a part of this Stage 32 community. And if you guys have an opportunity to sign up today, we actually are bringing in the development executive for Paramount Plus this afternoon. So if you are around and you're available, we have an executive hour where the development executive at Paramount Plus is going to be answering questions, and they'll be live working one-on-one with the Stage 32 community. So hopefully you guys will be able to join us in the Stage 32 writers room. It is the most vibrant and just amazing and encouraging community on the planet. We've watched the writers' room members over the months and the years get signed to management. We've seen them network and have films created, and we have seen people get option deals, getting their scripts picked up, and it is really just an incredible professional tool for you as a writer, and you get access to it for free. So that is the big giveaway for today. I hope you guys enjoy that. And I do hope to see you guys in the writers' room. We're gonna be doing a really fun writers' room end of year webcast at the end of this month with our CEO, RB, who you met earlier. And we're gonna have a great time for that to celebrate the holidays. All right, so I think that's it. You guys, thank you so much for all of your comments. And then if you do have questions about the writers' room, and if you have specific questions, you can email Jason at any time, and his email is j.mirch, M-I-R-C-H @stage32.com. So, all right, guys, thank you so much for being a part of today's Netflix and Stage 32 webinar. And Anna, thank you for everything. And we will look forward to seeing everybody on Stage 32. And I think that's it. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you, Anna.
All right, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.